All right, good evening, everybody. I've got 7 o'clock. Today is Monday, December 11th, 2023. I'd like to call the meeting of the Committee of the Whole to order. We will start first with a couple discussion items, and I'm going to invert discussion items 1 and 2 and also add something to number 2 and turn things over to Madam Mayor for an update about water billing.
And actually, if I could, I'd like to invite our Senior Deputy Director, Mr. Weibensinger, to come up and explain what's going on with the water bills.
Good evening.
Hey, good evening. As we've been pointed out, so the water bills that have been released, there is an overlap that has occurred. So we're working through the policy over the last few billing cycles and ensuring that every resident has 30 days from the date of the bill. It has created an overlap. So the November bill is still not due until the 22nd. On top of the bill, it did print that it's a past due amount. That is, it should not have printed a past due amount because it is not a past due amount. The bill that went out, we aim to try to get the bills out on the 10th of the month, every month. It went out on the 11th. We were able to get back on schedule. But because of the going out before the old one was due, some of them did trigger with that red ink that says past due, but it is not past due. I just verified there have been no fees assessed to anybody. So they still have their old amount is still due on the 22nd. The new amount won't be due until the 1st or the 11th of January. Hopefully that makes sense. We're working with our billing print service to adjust some of the language that goes on there. This is one where it should have been checked to not print on that for anything that wasn't more than 30 days past due. Some people will have a past due amount if they have a legitimate past due amount, but those that are still timely and do not have a bill that is due until the 22nd, they can disregard that. And I know we're updating social media to put that out there. Any questions? Or?
Colleagues? Ms. Bowers?
Yeah, just quickly, so it looks like the due date advanced by about a week, is that right?
So it'll always be 30 days from when we mail it out. Previously, if we were late getting it out, it shortened the window for the residents to pay because it was always due on the 30th. So we try to get out by the 10th, but because of timing on holidays and staffing and any type of issues, if we didn't get out to the 17th, it would still do the 30th. So the new process we have now, it is 30 days from when we issue the bill. So it gives the residents more time to pay the bill if we're late.
The change in policy is to help the resident and give them more time, giving them a guaranteed period of time to respond.
With the invoicing, and I appreciate that, so thank you for getting it back on track to targeting to the 10th of the month.
Yeah.
With the change happening now and perhaps residents having a bill due maybe 10 days in the month sooner than maybe they thought, will there be any grace period?
So
for a couple months?
The one from last month, it was 12 days later than it should have. So they got 12 days grace period for the bill that's due on the 22nd of this month, if that makes sense.
Okay.
It should have, if we would have hit the 10th deadline, it would have already been due, but it's not due until the 22nd. But they still will have a full 30 days from the new amount to pay as well.
When will since there was there an overlap in the meter?
No, just in the billing period. So if you look at your bill, you'll be able to see the date range. The date range is still sequential. It was just the timing of us being 12 days delayed on last month's bill and getting caught back up on this month. It just, the way it printed. But you can look at your billing periods, and the billing periods do not overlap for the meter reads.
Okay, so
Yeah.
the amount indicated on the invoice, on the bill is correct?
Correct, yes.
And the period of time for the bill is accurate, and there's no overlap in that?
Correct, yes.
Okay, so
Yep.
it's just a matter of
Of the due date.
the
really.
due date shifted forward, but it still is a full 30 days from when the billing went out?
Correct. Yep.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much.
Anybody else?
Yeah,
Yes, Mrs. Angela.
Okay, so I got mine, and I said 12/21/2023 is the date, and then I actually said I'm going to pay at that date, but and it's all ready to go. Is that correct?
You mean the one that you've already,
Right now, I have paid, I've put it into the thing saying to pay it on 12/21/2023,
okay.
$106.85. And it went through, so that'll work, won't it?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yep.
just get it and do it that way. Thank
Yeah,
you.
and again, a lot of residents have already paid, so it didn't affect everybody. It's those that still have that paid in the last 10 days of the bill period. That's where it printed on their bill.
Thank you very much, Director. Appreciate it. Staying in the world of public service and maybe engineering, I thought we'd tackle number 2 on the discussion items first. So I'm not sure if that's still you, Director Wyman-Singer, or regarding truck traffic on Stigler Road. Maybe I'll turn things over to you, Mr. Renner.
Yeah, thank you. This is just a follow-up item from a constituent on the west side who let us know that truck traffic, he feels, has increased. And they're also using the jake braking a lot as they're going down the hill towards Moore's Road. And so he's hearing it, and I will have to concur that I definitely have noticed. It's anecdotally, I didn't keep a scientific analysis or study, but the truck traffic on Stigler definitely has seemed to increase. Furthermore, the resident actually harkens back, claims that there was a sign on Stigler that said no through trucks or something like that, to that effect. And so we were asking, is that true? Do we have any memory of such a sign? And if there is such a sign, is that illegal today in modern world of zoning? And is that something that we can actually employ?
Sure. And Chief Spence, I think, is prepared to talk a little bit about this.
So I think the first question is, was it ever signed? The answer is, I don't know. So I'm going into my 32nd year here. The Stigler Road seems to be at the heart of this issue. We do have, thanks, Corey. It was done with that. Section 33902, use of local streets by through trucks, is within our code. It presents a number of challenges from an enforcement ability. I believe potentially the same constituent rose this question back in 2017. We spent over 100 hours studying truck traffic. We made a number of inquiries with the potential sources of truck traffic, which was often referred to as the limited, being the source of that truck traffic. We eliminated the limited as being that source for the most part. And again, we can't determine that there isn't an off-route truck at some point. The limited has directions for its drivers. So when a driver calls in to set up delivery or to coordinate a delivery, those automated directions direct them from 270 to Morris Road to Stigler Road to their in-processing area. There were also claims that there were shortcuts for Columbus refuse trucks going up to the processing station at Morris and Stigler Road. We did find during those over 100 hours of monitoring truck traffic, we did find one trash truck. That trash truck finished a route or completed a Columbus route just on the other side of West Johnstown Road and did traverse up Stigler Road. I think in that particular case, having that driver turn completely around, go about 5 or 10 minutes out of their way to the refuse station through Stelzer Road and other means to get to that, really not practical. And for that one that one route, it was not a throughfare for other refuse trucks. Which brings us to the enforceability. Stigler Road begins outside of our jurisdiction. So does McCutcheon Road. So does West Johnstown Road. In the code, of course, U.S. and state routes are exempt from, through truck traffic. We can't restrict state or federal routes. The ability for us to identify probable cause for a violation would be, in fact, to see that that truck entered the jurisdiction, and by code, every entrance into the city, and that's every entrance. There is no relief for, like, say, going into Harrison Pond or going into any of the Morse Road subdivisions. We would have to observe that vehicle entering into the city. We would have to then follow it completely through to it exiting the city without making any stop. If it were to stop at Speedway, if it were to stop anywhere else, make any deliveries, that can be accomplished over surface streets. So the code in and of itself is flawed in providing us probable cause to even do enforcement. Whether that sign was there, I don't know, but I think that sign would have to be posted at the top of the hill, which is the entrance into the city. And then if somebody, and it's certainly a possibility that a truck going to the limited, which again seems to be the source, overshoots that entranceway into their receiving station. Well, then the question becomes, where do they turn around? And if we post at the top of the hill, there's no through trucks, are we adding to, again, a problem situation where those trucks are having then to turn around? Where are they going to turn around to execute that turn? The code further restricts trucks and semi-trailers, as it stands today, to 2.5 tons. So they're commercial, they're personal vehicles, Ford F-350s. We just had a crash involving a Ford F-350, so I know the empty weight of that is almost 6,000 pounds. Well over 2.5 tons. So then it gets into a complete rewrite of the code to maybe vector in on a tractor-trailer combination. It's about 35,000 pounds, roughly 15 tons unloaded. But again, I think the problem rests with, is it enforceable? And you can see the challenges, especially, and I've been in front of this body before, I've talked about, we're in an urban environment. People don't realize that, 2 lanes of Gahanna on Morse Road are in our jurisdiction as you travel eastbound, but you go through the center dividing line and you're in Columbus. People just don't realize that quick change of jurisdictional venue that unfortunately hampers some of our ability to localize control over traffic code. That's it, in terms of the challenges. I can say we did spend well over 100 hours. We followed trucks. I would categorize probably 90+% of those vehicles were involved in some local commerce. Pepsi trucks delivering to the gas stations, other large loads that are being dropped off. The auto parts stores, most of their deliveries occur on a typical tractor-trailer assembly, a 35,000 pound gross vehicle weight unloaded. We have 2 auto parts stores right at the intersection of Agler and Stigler Road. Again, none of that truck traffic, there was always a stop, there was always something that, and again, there were some limited exceptions. We just confirmed with the limited, because I believe we probably got the same complaint. It's the same complainant probably that back to 2017. I want to touch real quickly on compression braking. That's another issue. One, if there's a truck using compression braking, go down the hill, that's in the city of Columbus. It's nothing we can do to enforce that. Compression braking, there are various opinions. Again, compression braking or Jake braking is probably the slang term. We do get some complaints from Ballard and Cherry that back up onto the 670 interchange. I'm confident that truck drivers use compression braking to slow themselves. But again, that's an interstate route. There's varying opinions out there from the AG's office that kind of muddy the waters a little bit of local law enforcement being able to get into vehicle safety features. And a compression brake, if it is used in a circumstance to slow that vehicle to avoid a crash, is not in and of itself an illegal act. So then it's up to the officer to observe not just the sight, or not just the sound, but to observe that that brake was applied unnecessarily. And that becomes a very slippery slope, as you can imagine. So, and most of the 670 interchange that would impact that Cherry Ballard area is not within our jurisdiction.
Questions, comments from colleagues?
No, but Chief, I really thank you for that very thorough explanation, and a lot to think about. And, you know, my reply back to the constituent in this particular case was, this is a regional issue. We are in a heavily urbanized area. We are seeing growth, and we are seeing increase in commerce, and so these vehicles are around. I don't know what the solution is, to be honest with you. And then there's something else that you reminded me, as EV trucks come into play, those batteries are quite heavy, and we should probably take another review at the tonnage.
Well, I would also say that, you know, I think it's frequently said, you know, that directions route trucks up
Yeah.
surface streets. Commercial truck drivers use a whole separate GPS system than what we use. They don't typically use Google Maps. It's usually a third party that's specifically for truck drivers because, you know, they're culverts, there are all kinds of obstructions on the roadway that Google Maps is not programmed to recognize for a commercial truck driver. The last thing I would add is I understand that, you know, at some point there probably was signage. Again, I go back, you know, my days, Stigler Road was 2 lanes and it was barely that. But if signage is the will, then the code is specific. It has to be in every entrance. That becomes a very costly proposition for something that already has its challenges in enforcement. And frankly, then the burden becomes to the PD, why aren't you enforcing the signs? And that will be the very first question that comes to us. I've already laid out those challenges, and that kind of catches us in the middle of potentially being labeled that we're not doing our jobs and not enforcing the law. So that's my
Thank
only
you.
ask.
Yes, Ms. Bowers.
Chief, thank you so much, and certainly helps us all be responsive to the community. If we start hearing, or if you start hearing more repeated concerns of this nature, would you mind bringing it back to us?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say I have a lot of meetings on the west side of Gahanna with the subdivisions. My monthly meeting, yes, I'm aware that there seems to be an isolated complaint of this nature, but it's not widespread. And I would say, you know, obviously commercial traffic, commercial truck traffic is going to continue to evolve over time, as Mr. Renner, you know, brought up. We've got a whole host of changes related to EV vehicles, how we respond to crashes involving those vehicles. And finally, I just want to add one thing, and I apologize going on a diatribe, but the final thing is, you know, on commercial vehicle traffic, you know, ultimately it's a safety factor. And the amount of commercial vehicles that are involved in crashes on our surface streets is probably in the low single digits annually. The problem with commercial vehicles has resulted in fatalities. In fact, a fatality just within the last maybe 6 months related to commercial vehicles overloaded, off route on non-permitted, they're not in compliance with their permits for moving loads. That's where our focus has been, and unfortunately, that's on 270. But that's where we've had the fatalities related to commercial vehicles.
Thank you very much, Chief. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Circle back to discussion item B1, public arts policy. This is routine seeking a status update and any discussion. Madam Mayor.
The panel is meeting this Wednesday, the 13th. They have said that they will provide a draft to me shortly after that meeting. Once I receive that from them, I will take it under review, consult with our First Amendment legal experts, and a policy will be issued. So right now, just waiting for the panel to meet on Wednesday.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Okay, we will turn next to items from council office. First, ordinance 69-2023 concerning amendments to the traffic code. I believe I'll defer to the city attorney on this one.
Yes, we do an ordinance codifying, close to every year now. It takes a little while. And this is for the 300 sections, our traffic section alone. When this came into effect, when we were ready to present it the first time, the new distracted driving law just came into effect. And so the chief and I discussed this. We wanted to see how the enforcement went and to see if there's any changes that need to be made before we changed it now and then change it again later. After that discussion that we've had, we believe that it's ready to be presented as we had originally presented it.
Thank you, Mr. City Attorney. Any discussion? Ms. Bowers.
Yes, Mr. Malarski, are there any deviations in this code from the state ordinance?
We do have some deviations, but not concerning the distracted driving.
Okay. What are they concerning?
For instance, in the state ordinance, it says that we cannot cite a vehicle that's parked on the roadway with an expired license plate. Well, our zoning officers already have that ability to do that, and we felt it was incongruent to have the police department not be able to do that, yet the zoning department be able to do that. So one example. I think some of well, I don't know that there's a difference, but we're allowed to have, like authorize and allowed to have golf carts travel on our roads, but that's only if we authorize it. So we discussed that. We did not think it was appropriate to authorize golf carts to travel on Gahanna city streets. It's been quite a while ago. I don't remember what some of the other deviations are, but it was, I remember that. I remember discussions concerning what vehicles would be allowed on the pass, the multi-use pass. And we talked about the bicycles that have certain speed limits, and it limits the speed limits. And I believe in the end, we ended up agreeing, that's how right, Stephanie, we agreed with what the state chose as the ultimate speed limits that are allowed on the vehicles with the level of speed limit per vehicle to be allowed on those paths. I think we stayed with what the state chose from what I can remember, but like I said, it's been 6-7 months ago.
I'm not prepared to speak directly to that. I know that the comments were, in order to identify, it's hard to understand by visual representation if a vehicle is speeding or has a higher speed limit than others. It's hard to determine if they're traveling at a higher pace. So I would have to review that language in response to what was decided.
Okay, thank you. And that's what comes to mind.
Would you be able to provide us with the other areas, a comprehensive list of other areas where this deviates from state code?
I should be able to, yeah.
Okay. And I guess I would also be interested in more discussion around the decision about the golf carts, why that decision was made, and I don't know if public safety wants to speak to that as well, but why there was a decision made to not extend the use of golf carts to 25-mile-an-hour neighborhoods or residential streets. We can certainly bring this back to committee at another time, too, if that's the preference.
Chief, are you able to speak to that now, or would you rather we bring it back?
Yeah, okay. Like I said, these particular discussions were 6 months ago.
And then I guess too, the other thing I'd like to have maybe further discussion on would be around why we've matched state code on distracted driving versus some of the recommended changes from from community advocates. And so maybe we can have discussion on that. And okay.
Yeah.
Up to you if you want to do that now or later.
Yeah,
So again, I know Sharon's here, I can appreciate her passion. I have said this before to this body, and I just mentioned it a short time ago. When people who operate in the state of Ohio should know the rules of the road. And if we are to vastly, vastly change the distracted driving statute for Gahanna, we're going to have to post that signage in every entrance to the city. And we're going to have to condense a very confusing, and I'll admit, Sharon, we've discussed this, the current law that was passed at the state level, in my opinion, makes absolutely no sense and almost renders it very difficult from an enforcement standpoint. I understand the goal, but if we're to further restrict it, make different rules, again, the motoring public, and again, they don't know when they travel from Columbus to Gahanna, and those rules of the road should be equal across, especially in a major urban area that we find ourselves in. And it's, again, very difficult. And then the question would be, how would we effectively through signage, because we would have to post some type of signage pointing out those restrictions in a manner that is understandable, because hands-free only, well, that doesn't really convey what the changes would be.
Chief, I thought that Columbus and Bexley had hands-free rules long before the state did. Is that correct?
I think there was some movement. Yes, the answer is yes. I think some of that was frankly unenforceable. And again, it becomes, if it becomes symbolic, then I think it's a question of, is it something that we need to put in code? And again, I think there is an expectation, and the current, as it is currently written, is extremely difficult from an enforcement standpoint. Now, I think that the key to all this is to clean up the language in the state code, which will make it much more effective. And I understand they've tried, but it really needs to be cleaned up at the state level, because I think we would make even more of a muddy mess in trying to adjust it locally and have a patchwork of laws across a major urban area.
I appreciate that. I think one thing I'd be interested in ascertaining is whether Columbus and Bexley and other jurisdictions in central Ohio have amended their hands-free statutes to match the state code, or whether they've kept in place their municipal ordinances. Because to your point, and it's a very fair point, it's very well taken, I'm interested in seeing maybe a regional cohesion that makes sense regionally. But I do understand, Chief, that we're going to maybe just disagree on this a little bit.
We can disagree. I understand that there was, I think the question is, which I think now I understand, is now that the state changed it, have those local ordinances been adopted to reflect the state? To my knowledge, they have, but I can go back and I can determine if anybody else has amended their code, make it further restrictive from when this was passed. And the moratorium, not moratorium, the warning only phase expired. So it probably now is the better time to check, and I can get back with you on that.
Okay. Thank you, Chief.
Sure.
Given these requests and the fact that this has already been held, I'm perhaps would ask that we bring this back to committee before a first reading.
It works for me. Mr. Clerk? Thank you, Chief. Next up, motion to amend the rules of procedure of council. Ms. Bowers?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I have proposed here, and I've worked on this a little bit with Clerk Van Meter, some cleanup to our rules of procedure of council. These changes for the largely bring in line our rules of procedure with what has been happening in practice. The only substantive change, there's a couple substantive changes. The primary one being that council president would be permitted to designate a board member to the CIC rather than serving him or herself on the CIC. The other change was to amend, excuse me, I'm pulling up the red line right now, to amend the,
What page?
it's page 3 of the red line version, sections E and F of Rule 3.20. So we added E4, which would appoint a council representative to serve on the city's capital improvement plan advisory committee, consistent with the ordinance that was passed earlier this year, 60-2023. We amended the language around a government liaison to change that to the Gahanna Jefferson Board of Education liaison, which is what's been happening in practice. And then added section G, which would be to have the president serve on the city's capital improvement plan advisory committee pursuant to that same ordinance that was passed earlier this year. And then the only question that I wanted to pose to my colleagues for consideration, there had been some discussion about appointing nonprofit liaisons as a more formalized role, where there would be a report out. I see some advantages, and maybe it may not be necessary, but I wanted to open that up for discussion if anyone had any thoughts on designating 2 nonprofit liaisons that would interface and report back to council.
Colleagues?
So nothing on that, sir, but I do have a question regarding some of the changes when appropriate.
Oh,
Anything as to Ms. Bowers' specific question about nonprofit liaisons from anybody?
What, I don't understand what that would be.
it would be serving in a similar role to the Board of Education liaison, where it would be a designate, we would, if you serve on the board of a nonprofit, or if you are interacting with a nonprofit or are approached by a nonprofit, that you would just liaise with the council. And then there would be a standing report as we have on the regular council agenda for reporting back on nonprofit activities, for example. So if the Historical Society, for example, or GRIN had activities going on, that could be a standing report out section on the agenda designated by a specific liaison.
They wouldn't necessarily be a board member.
I'm sorry.
They wouldn't necessarily be a board member.
Correct.
Do you think that's needed?
I am opening it to the floor to see if there's an appetite from council. I think it's sort of a role of all that we all play as council members. But I just wanted to open the conversation to see, so it wasn't just my opinion on it, making a decision.
I kind of agree with your, well, sorry, Mr. Chair.
I think Mrs. McGregor was about to.
Well, I know one time, and this was a long time ago, the city appointed somebody to come to the Historical Society meetings. But it was more perceived as somebody watching us, like, rather than just coming to see what we're doing, and it was not, it didn't turn out so well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it wasn't a bad, anything bad happened, it just seemed like it was kind of, somebody watching what you're doing.
Right.
Not that they aren't welcome and the people aren't welcome to meetings, I mean, it just seemed like an odd thing to have somebody appointed to go to your meetings that you didn't ask to have somebody come to your meetings.
Was not the intention, it would be just as a point of contact perhaps to the
Sure.
city's nonprofits. But I appreciate the historical perspective on that, thank you.
Mr. Schnitz,
Go with Kaylee first.
Ms. Padova.
I do think that, like you said, I think we all kind of do a good job at being visible in the community and going to different things and reporting back on those as we attend different events and see things happening in the community. Because there are so many nonprofits, I think it would be kind of hard. I would probably be more against this just because I wouldn't want to have some of them feeling like, oh, well, they're always reporting on this nonprofit or this one, but never on this one. So I think as it stands, we do a pretty good job of that. But if a need arises, then I think we could revisit this again.
Ditto, Ms. Padova.
I certainly support the intent, and I share the belief, that we should all be serving, in other capacities, and if there's something worth sharing with the rest of the community, absolutely. I would follow up your question with another question. How, and maybe Mrs. McGregor would be the best person to answer this, how has it been handled when maybe a nonprofit has come to council and said, hey, we would love to have a council member as part of our board? Because I know that is in some organizations, they've had, a member of our board of trustees shall be an appointed representative from the city council.
I know that that's happened, but it always seems like it's kind of presumptuous of them to think that one of us would be appointed to be on their board. Like you say, there's so many nonprofits.
Well, right.
That how do you choose which one would have a council representative? I mean, the Historical Society has one just because I've been a member for 40 years by virtue. I'm not there as a council representative.
Right.
But how would you, I don't know that that's, I don't think they can dictate to say, you have to appoint somebody to my board.
And I suppose I do see the difference with, the CIC and the CVB. Those are
Sure.
creatures by statute and have a formalized relationship with
We
the
have
city.
more of a monetary, financial
Absolutely,
relationship,
yeah.
so that's a different, but just a,
No, but I appreciate the history and the context. Does that give you information, Ms.
Oh,
Bowers?
absolutely, yeah. I just, like I said, I wanted to open it to the floor and see if there was a perspective that I didn't have on it and have that discussion. I think Mr. Schnitzer had a comment about
Yes.
perhaps other.
I do.
Mr. Schnetzer?
Thank you so much. I'm just hoping to, I guess, gather some clarity surrounding some of the proposed points that deal with the CIP Advisory Committee. I'm going from memory, but what I thought what was proposed when we drafted that plan was that I think initially what was suggested to us was Council President and the Finance Chair would sit on the CIP Advisory Committee. There was an ask from Council that we expand the council involvement to 3 seats, which kind of left a third one that would need to be appointed. And from what I read in sort of this blue line section here, it appears that this rule change would speak to 2 of the 3. It would sort of formalize the president's role, and it would formalize the appointee. There's no mention, at least as far as I can tell, of the finance chair sitting on that board. So just seeking clarity as to what's going on there. Do we still have the 3 seats, or are we down to 2, and who serves on those?
That was an inadvertent omission, and we do want to bring this in line with that ordinance Jeremy and I can amend this to ensure that the finance chair would also serve on the CIP advisory board.
I believe, and I'd have to look at the full rules, but I believe the rules permit the appointment of the finance chair. So are you wanting to clarify that for the CIP advisory committee specifically, that the president appoints the finance chair to serve on that?
I think we would probably want to add the, under a finance standing committee, we probably need to identify specifically that the finance chair would, the duty of the finance chair would also be to serve on the CIP advisory board. And actually, I think that's totally missing from the appointment list altogether, right?
So I guess, Ms. Bowers, if I may, I agree that that's not there under 3.2, but I don't know that that's where the finance chair's placement on the CIP board would live. Because if it's just by ordinance that the finance chair is, it wouldn't be under the president's authority, correct?
Right, so maybe there's another section that identifies duties of the finance chair, under finance subcommittee, under
Which I'm doing a real quick skim on.
7.10. I did want to mention that there is a lot of cleanup that needs to happen to these rules generally speaking, and that this is not a comprehensive edit, but we wanted to get this cleaned up, at least to the extent that we could for this round, and then definitely come back to other council rule cleanup.
So I'll just throw this out there if I may. So either there can be in addition to the, I guess, the roles of whoever's chairing finance committee, or there could be a deletion of the proposed role under the president's section that pertains to serving on the capital improvement plan advisory committee. I think it's 6 in one hand, half dozen in the other, the way I see it. If it's in statute, I'd be fine with getting rid of it in the rules section.
Excuse me.
But I do agree, I think the appointment of the third person would fall under here.
Okay. Maybe Mr. Van Meter and I can look at this over the week and see where it would best fit in to insert maybe duties of finance chair. And we can work with you, Mr. Schmitzer.
Sure.
Would that be all right? Okay.
For what it's worth, I think I'd prefer to see it added in to make explicitly clear rather than deleting language elsewhere. But
We will bring this on for motion and adoption for the 18th with the requested amendments. And if anyone has any other thoughts, please email Clerk Van Meter. Thank you.
So we'll keep that one on the regular agenda then.
Yes, regular
Yep.
agenda is fine. We won't need an amendment since it's a motion.
Motion.
So it can just be presented as is on the 18th.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for your work on that, and thank you, Mr. Clerk. Appreciate it. Next up, a resolution expressing gratitude for Make Gahanna Yours Farmers Market volunteers. Ms. Bowers, I think this might also be you.
Yes, pretty self-explanatory, but wanted to express support and gratitude to the Make Gahanna Yours Farmers Market team for their 5 years of service to their all-volunteer team of bringing a farmers market to the city of Gahanna through significant adversity and the pandemic. I have been in touch with the farmers market team. They've approved the language here and intend to attend next week for a ceremonial presentation.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. Any discussion?
Just the staggering, that first line where it says farmers markets accounted for $1.7 billion in income for farmers in the United States in 2020, according to the U.S. Senate. There are small countries that don't have a GDP.
Right.
There's 1.7 billion. That's amazing. It's a big number.
Yeah.
Consent okay for this one then, folks?
Yes.
Okay.
With a presentation at the beginning of the agenda.
Great.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. We'll turn now to items from the Department of Economic Development. Good evening, Director.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of council. The first item is an ordinance accepting, approving, and ratifying the submitted recommendations of the City of Gahanna Tax Incentive Review Council for tax year 2022. As usual, each year, we have to meet with the Turk Board at the County Auditor's Office, and this covers the 2022 incentives. We met with them on August 29th, Finance Director Joanne Burry, myself, and Development Coordinator Rachel Zarek. We presented our findings after submitting the report on August 29th, and then they had asked for some additional information, which we provided to them in mid-October, and we got the notice of compliance on November 20th, recommending approval of all of the incentives. So that is good news, and we would hope that you would consider this in the upcoming meetings. The first reading would be on the 18th, and then the vote would be taking place on the first meeting in January.
Thank you, Director. Any discussion? All right. Schedule is fine by me first, and I would ask that this needs to go on the regular agenda as I will need to abstain from this vote. Thank you, Director. Next item, please.
Yes, the next item is the ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into an amended agreement with the Gahanna Community Improvement Corporation and to further define the uses of funding. A couple of meetings ago, the amended agreement was presented to City Council for their review. Those items were redlined, as you may recall, in that amended agreement. Council had asked for some additional information, and those questions were addressed in the blue version submitted to council for review, which basically talked about how those items to be presented to the finance director would be reviewed for eligibility of payment moving forward. Also sent to council today was a listing of the anticipated 2024 expenses and revenues. That budget was provided to you for review. Board member George Russ is here. He had asked to address the board, the council, and also Treasurer Jeff Kessler is here to talk about questions you may have regarding that budget that was presented to you. If you have no questions, I would like to invite George.
Good evening, Mr. Russ and Mr. Kessler.
Do I have to give my name and address?
It's not the public comment period, so you're fine.
Do you want to follow protocol? So I would like to thank council and the administration, and I'm grateful for time to provide perspective on the CIC City of Gahanna contract conversation. Given the numerous items on the agenda, I will keep my comments brief. CIC is made up of volunteers who dedicate their time, life, business skills, and experience in support of its core mission, that of current and future economic development in the City of Gahanna. Of note for the public, the CIC currently has 2 active CPAs, a number of licensed attorneys, a financial services executive for a local bank, 2 members of council, as well as others like myself who bring a wealth of knowledge from a variety of disciplines in our Central Ohio and Gahanna community into and with each and every discussion item. CIC City of Gahanna contract is a living document in that it periodically needs to be reviewed and updated. As many on council are aware, the Gahanna CIC has been over the past many years one of the more active and opportunistic CICs within Central Ohio. We, the CIC, have partnered with the city on numerous occasions in this core mission of planting the seeds for current and future economic development. That being said, one of the primary functions of the CIC in partnership with or the administration has been the strategic purpose of property within the city. In many instances, the CIC has held these properties with specific intent at a time to be determined for future economic, commercial, and/or infrastructure development. The responsibility and costs associated with these properties entails many expenses not different than that of a homeowner or property owner: taxes, maintenance fees, utility expenses, etc. I am aware of the protocol and import that exists with the checks and balances and the use of taxpayer funds to support economic development. Council, the administration, our residents and businesses can rest assured that the established protocol between the CIC and the city will never be compromised, and that, well, I should say never, as long as I'm on CIC, will not be compromised, and that any CIC invoice for eligible expenses submitted to the city for reimbursement will be consistent with this practice as well as established protocol. As a longtime CIC trustee and Gahanna resident, I would ask that council support current and future economic development in Gahanna. One that reflects the noted updates and changes to the attached CIC City of Gahanna contract. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morris.
I just want to make a few comments. I have been involved with CICs around Franklin County for many years, and it's not uncommon for this type of relationship to exist as we have outlined in this amended agreement. I know that people want things to happen very quickly, and the reality of it is we are in an unprecedented time for the cost of money, availability of money, materials, and so forth. The good news is, right now we're talking to 4 development companies that I believe will lead to at least 1 or 2 LOIs early in 2024. So the expenses that you see may or may not be actually reflective. If we are fortunate enough to have an LOI and a project initiated, you know, those expenses may be less than shown here. You know, we would have had probably a project occur if it wasn't for one particular property owner that was very unrealistic in their demands for the purchase of their property. So the good news is the interest is building, and I fully suspect in the first quarter of 2024, we'll have a major announcement for, if not one, multiple developments, if not one developer, multiple developers. So I hope that you would consider this agreement for what it's worth. Personally, when I read the agreement, I didn't feel as though changes needed to be made because I think all of those expenses reflected in that budget are applicable expenses. But I thought in the conversations that we had among the CIC board, it was appropriate to fully outline what those expenses were because there were some questions about what is eligible. So I think this agreement does specify that clearly. As I mentioned, Jeff is here. If you'd like to ask any questions regarding those anticipated expenses and revenues for 2024.
Thank you, Director, and I'd like to personally thank our guests, Mr. Kessler and Mr. Morris, and I will just say it's an absolute pleasure serving with you both on the board of the CIC, and I thank President Renner for the appointment. Any discussion from my colleagues? Mr. Schnitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 2 weeks ago, well, let me take a step back, kind of set the table a little bit. I'm assuming, Director Hammonds, that the portion there in blue text under Section 3, number 3, that was added, I guess, in response to the question that I had raised 2 weeks ago about does the change in this language in any way create some sort of a liability for the city that we must fund? Again, you know, it's impossible to, I guess, list every single potential future liability that may emerge, but there's some specific language in here: hazard mitigation, environmental remediation, and property taxes, right? Things that could potentially get expensive. And I guess my concern is I want to have a sort of clear separation between the city and the CIC when it comes to any future liabilities that may emerge. So I guess that's a very long-winded way of getting to my question, which is, I assume that blue text is in response to that inquiry.
Yes, that's correct, sir.
So then my next question is, I suppose, for the city attorney. Mr. Milarski, have you reviewed that? And do you believe that that, for lack of a better word, ring fences the city, immunizes us from any future liabilities beyond that which has already been appropriated?
Yes, I have reviewed it, and I believe we've done our best to insulate the city.
Thank you very much.
Any further discussion on this item? Ms. Bowers?
Thank you. With regard to the contract, there had been a little bit of discussion perhaps around, if I'm recalling correctly, establishing some proportion of funding for land acquisition versus the other expenses. Could you speak to that not being included here, if I'm reading it correctly?
Well, I think that this language would cover land purchases as well. If it was determined that such an action wanted to take place, we'd bring that to the city for consideration as well. I don't know that this language would preclude that process. It would come and be considered as any other item that would be considered an eligible expense.
Let me ask it a different way. I'm not sure that my question was communicated correctly. I believe that there was some conversation that would earmark a percentage of public dollars for acquisition of new land versus servicing expenses on existing CIC-owned property.
I don't recall there being a discussion about percentages related to land purchases versus expenses. If there was, I apologize, but I don't recall that being discussed.
Okay, thank you.
Are you thinking in terms of budget appropriation to the CIC?
No, I thought there was some mention of earmarking in the agreement that a certain, up to a certain percentage of allocated funds would be used for payment of expenses, but I could be misrecalling our last discussion on this.
If that was discussed, I don't recall that. I apologize, but I don't remember that actually being any part of the discussion previously.
Where would that be? Where did you ever hear that? Because CIC is pretty quiet and keeps their information.
Oh, no, it
What was
wasn't.
that?
I thought it was
Am I
discussed
missing?
at last committee meeting.
Oh,
Was that mentioned? I thought that was mentioned at the last committee meeting as part of.
thank you. I wasn't sure where you got your information, so that's fine.
No information coming from any CIC member on that. It was a,
Yeah, I don't recall that being discussed. Was that ever?
I don't either.
okay.
Thank you.
Anything else on this item, folks, or colleagues? This did have a first reading on the 4th, so it would require an amendment on the 18th to reflect the edits that have been made since then. Regular agenda for this one. Are folks comfortable moving forward on the 18th on the regular agenda with this? Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Director.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we've got items from the Department of Administrative Services. Good evening, Director Voltmar. And good evening.
Good evening. If I may, I would like to take action item 1 and 3, and then this is Ben Nolan, HR Manager, and he is here to present item 2.
Wonderful.
So item 1 on the report is for the request for salary ordinances for the personnel of the city of Gahanna. Each year prior to the adoption of the following year's budget, we bring forward the proposed salary ordinance to council for adoption. This ordinance sets forth the salaries for the non-union personnel of the city of Gahanna. For the salary adjustments to align with the 2024 budget in the new year, this is a requested ordinance with emergency and waiver. And I'll just go over generally the changes for the 2024 ordinance. The details of all the changes are contained in the report that was submitted. So there's addition of different pay classification titles at pay grades, deletion of jobs, classifications that are no longer used, separation of the streets and utilities superintendent into a streets superintendent and utilities superintendent at pay grade 19, and a couple title changes. In addition, in section 3, there's a request, as it is in the budget, for a 3.25% increase for employees outside of the STEP program to occur their first full pay period after anniversary date. In addition, the following changes are recommended in the salary ordinance, also contained in the 2024 budget request. And this year, the compensation was reviewed again by our city's consultant, Clemens Nelson, and the following recommendations are contained in this ordinance. In order to be competitive with market data, the consultant recommended we increase the maximum of pay grades by 5%. With the 5% increase in the maximum of the pay grades, the adjustment to midpoint to coincide with that maximum is also contained therein. The addition of pay grade 27, and then the assignment of the senior directors to pay grade 27, as well as the chief of police. After review of market data, there's a recommendation to move the directors to pay grade 25, recreation coordinator to pay grade C12, recreation coordinator 2 to 13, engineer to pay grade 17, manager for human resources to pay grade 21, and then the deputy chief of police to pay grade 26. In addition with these items, there's a request to update the pay administration plan, and that is to remove section B of 4B4, where it dictates that the chief of police and deputy chief of police pay rates in the pay plan, since they're being recommended to move onto the salary ordinance. Happy to answer any questions now, or I can wait till finance committee, since most of these are tied to the budget, whatever you prefer.
Mr. Schnetzer.
Yeah, thank you, Director Bowman. Just one question as it pertains to the information that you've provided. The 3.25%, in layman's terms, just general pay increase, I'm assuming that's consistent with some of the various collective bargaining agreements that we have out there? I mean, within reason, right? Within the
Yes,
similar
they're all 3.25,
Thank
all
you very
three
much.
union contracts and the unclassified ordinance.
ballpark? Thank you so much.
Any other questions or comments on this particular item? Recognizing that we still have finance committee later, but yes, Ms. Bowers.
I recall when we went through the big salary reorganization last year, that there was a lot of discussion with alignment regionally and with other comparable public sector roles. Was that done for this as well? This proposed amendment, particularly adding the pay grade 27?
So last year's compensation review did not include any of the directors or managers. So this year we only did the manager, well, superintendents and above, so that'd be superintendents, managers, and directors.
That surprises me, that, because I thought there was explicit discussion around director pay grade last year.
I would have to check, but I don't believe so. The other item is our consultant does many compensation reviews for the area, and so as they were doing this round and last year, like ours typically gets done before other municipalities, and so this year they had new market data to compare against as well. I would have to review the reports from the consultant from last year compared to this year, because we have not made any adjustments to directors. They were excluded from the last couple rounds.
Okay, we'll go back and review. Because my memory is, I don't remember.
Director, thank you. Appreciated your time towards the end of last week, and the explanation you gave that I found very helpful, and I thought maybe might be helpful for my colleagues as well, regarding the relation with certain roles that are listed but maybe not contemplated in appropriations for the budget, and sort of the cleanup that's done, and if somebody gets hired mid-year and some titles are no longer used.
Yeah, so some of the titles we have added are they're in the budget for next year, or some titles are added, so in the event we would need to use them throughout the year. When I give my staffing presentation, I have a whole outline of how we determine how vacancies are filled and how we do our staffing request, so that might give me some more information. But some of the titles added are because sometimes when we hire people, when we review the vacancy, there might not be a need for that vacancy any longer. It might be a pay grade above or below. And so we incorporate these titles into the pay grade even if there's nothing planned for them to be. So in the event they need to be used, they're available.
Thank you very much, Director. Anything further on this item? Okay, will of council for regular or consent? Regular, please, on this one. I do see emergency and waiver is requested on this one, so be up for a vote on the 18th then. Believe you want to tackle number 3 next then, or do you want to?
Sure. Number 3 is the pay administration plan, and it's to remove the section 4B4 to remove the deputy chief and chief's pay in there. It was in the pay plan and not the salary ordinance. So since they're being added back to the salary ordinance table, it's to take that out. There's no other changes in there. It was updated last year to coincide with the step pay plan.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments on that? Regular consent on that one?
Just assume keep it all on regular
Okay.
agenda since it's going together.
Regular for that one, please, Mr. Clerk. All right. The second item, please, Mr. Nolan.
Thank you. Good evening. I have before you an action item for the 2024 Benefits Ordinance. This is the companion ordinance for the 2024 Salary Ordinance for unclassified personnel. Modifications to this ordinance include some minor language changes. It also includes adding a sick leave conversion option to either personal time or a cash out option. This conversion would allow unclassified employees the ability to convert up to 80 hours of sick leave to personal time or cash at a rate of 50% of the employee's current rate of pay. This is also consistent with our union counterparts. The incentive piece is being put in to assist with seasonal hiring in our Parks and Recreation Department. And this is being requested on emergency and waiver to begin on January 1st.
Thank you very much. Any discussion? I did have a quick question on this. So I was looking at looks like someone would have to have 480 hours in sick leave to be eligible to convert any sick leave to a cash payment or personal leave?
Yes.
Okay, so it would take a new employee roughly 4 years to be eligible to accumulate that then, at the rate they accrue?
Unless they brought prior sick leave from another agency.
Okay.
The prior sick leave from another agency is not eligible to be cashed out, but it can be included in the calculation.
Okay. Understood. That seems like a high threshold to me. Is it not? Is that pretty standard?
It's to cover an employee's FMLA allotted time.
This is the same language as in the FOP contract as well. They can't convert theirs to personal leave, but they can cash out 80 hours at 50%, so you get paid for 40. The intention is to help draw down employee sick leave balances at their current rate instead of their rate 20 years from now, when they retire.
I get that, in which case, my inclination then would be to allow them to do that sooner rather than waiting for such a large chunk to be accumulated. I'll just use an example. I work for the county. At the end of the year, I can convert 40 hours. I certainly haven't worked for the county for 4 years, nor does my prior service with the Fed count towards my public service with the county. But I am nowhere near, that total amount. And as long as I have 40 hours, or if I get 30 hours and that's what I have, I can convert that, even if that drains me out. I think that I see the intent to save money from down the line, and then also to be helpful to employees who want to make that conversion now. I guess I'd prefer that threshold to be lower, but if that's a standard,
It's a standard in the other collective bargaining agreements that have this language. It's also to ensure that if an employee needs to take family medical leave, the city does require that to use your paid time. So in a sense, if we're requiring you to have the 480 of sick leave, you're not drawing down your vacation balances. You're drawing down your sick leave balances for that FMLA leave. Also, if let's just say you have 80 hours and that's all you have and you cash it out, so you have none, what happens when you get sick?
leave without pay.
Well, you have to use your vacation. We wouldn't approve leave without pay if you have time on the books.
Fair enough.
Do the non-collective bargaining unit employees accumulate sick leave at the same rate that collective bargaining employees do?
I would have to look at all of them, but I'm pretty sure it's very similar. The longer you're here, the more you accumulate.
I think perhaps to ensure consistency, especially if we're setting that 480 threshold, that would make sense that they're accumulating sick leave at the same rate.
We can certainly check.
Is that
That helps. Thank you, Ms. Bowers. Yeah, thank you. Any further discussion on this? All right. I guess I'd prefer that on regular agenda, but if you could follow up with an email, I'd appreciate it. Okay, and last but not least, thank you both very much, appreciate it. And then last but not least, items from the Department of Engineering. Good evening, Director.
Good evening. Over the past year, we've been working on the Taylor Station Claycraft intersection. Designs complete, work through property acquisition, utility coordination. Utility providers are in the process of relocating their facilities for the pending improvements to convert the signalized intersection into a modern-day roundabout. We're in a position to request permission to bid on the project. Anticipate that work commencing late spring, early summer.
All right. Thank you very much. Any discussion from my colleagues? Great. Consent okay for this one, and this is a motion, so it'll just be on for consent next week. Thank you very much, Director. Anything else for the Committee of the Whole before we adjourn for Finance? All right, turn things over to you, Mr. Chair.
Well, just a quick clarification. Mr. Renner, is there anything to do with that special meeting?
Not at this time.
We're leaving it open?
We're leaving it available.
Recessed or whatever? Okay.
Yeah, we're still recessed until we need it. If we don't need it during Finance Committee, just Jeremy's supposed to help remind me that we need to adjourn it.
Okay. After Finance, of course. All right. Thank you. Pardon the housekeeping note. Mr. Van Meter, if you're ready to go?
We're ready.
Okay, all right. So let's commence Finance Committee for December 11th, 2023. I have a couple of items on the agenda for this evening. The first one, it looks to be a Q3 financial report for fiscal year 2023. And I'm guessing that is going to be Director Burry. All right. When you are ready, the floor is yours. everybody leaves there in finance.
I think I already had that on. All right, everybody ready? Okay, we're going to go through the 2023 Q3 report. So same as other quarters, we're going to talk mainly about the general fund, the special revenue funds that receive income tax, and the capital improvement fund. We're going to discuss those income tax trends through the end of the third quarter, what our investment portfolio looks like, and then the conclusion based on those results. So starting with general fund revenue, compared to the budget, we're at 90%, and compared to 2022, we're realizing a 20% increase of about $4.3 million. Compared to the budget, we're a little bit higher than would be expected for the third quarter. All revenue categories are above that 75% that would kind of be used as that threshold. All items look like they're going to produce more than what was budgeted for the year, with the exception of property taxes. Property taxes are done. They came in at 90%. At this time, I'm not sure why it didn't meet the target, but we'll look into that as we approach the fourth quarter. Looking at that comparison to 2022, the main drivers are investment income, followed by income taxes, and we'll talk about those a little bit further in the presentation. The other items to look at would be fines and fees, charges for services. We have increases there. We have some increases for income tax penalties and interest as we're collecting more. There's more of that's being assessed potentially. Then we also have increased mayor's court activity and licensing and permits related to construction throughout the city. Moving to expenses, compared to the budget, we're at 60%, and compared to last year, we're at about a 6% increase. A little bit lower than would be expected at this point on the expense side, but when encumbrances are considered, we're about 74%. The increase compared to last year is mainly being driven by salaries and benefits, and as we discussed before, that's kind of expected. We had some changes to the unclassified salary ordinance last year. Then we had some vacancies that were filled, and then, of course, we have the negotiated agreements that had those increases in there. Looking at fund balance impact after taking into consideration transfers out and advances in, we have about $7 million added to fund balance, bringing fund balance to $35.4 million. Of that amount, roughly $4.5 million is reserved for encumbrance, $7.45 million for the emergency reserve, leaves us an unreserved fund balance of about $23.5 million. That's equivalent to about 11 months of operations, way more than what's required by policy. Moving on, go ahead.
I was curious, could we pause at maybe each major fund group, the GF, the
Sure.
special funds, and then the capital improvement fund, just to see if anybody has any questions or comments based on that. So council colleagues, anything pertaining to the general fund, revenues, expenses, fund balance, anything like that? So I have one.
Yep.
If I recall correctly, kind of going way back in the time machine, your revenue projections have always been what I would say prudently on the conservative side of things, and it's always better to, I think, underpromise and overdeliver. If memory serves me correctly, the percentage increase for fiscal 2023 was a little bit higher than normal.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I want to make sure we're even outperforming that.
Correct.
Okay. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So looking at the three special revenue funds and how they compare to the budget, very similar. So public safety, about 80% of revenue and 57% of expenses. There is still the mental health clinician vacancy, which is why they haven't quite met the budget. They're on the salaries and benefit side. Parks and Recreation, their season is pretty much wrapped up for the year, except for a couple winter items. So seeing that they're right about where they should be at at end of season, 94% of revenue, about 82% of planned expenditures. They'll have a little bit more on the expenditure side as they continue maintenance through the winter months. On the public service side, looking at expenses, again, as we discussed previously, there were a lot of vacancies in that department, and they were hard to fill vacancies. So seeing that they're slowly getting to their salaries and benefits, but will stay below that budgeted amount because it took a little while to get those positions filled. Looking at how those funds compared to 2022, seeing increases across all three funds on revenue. Those income tax percentages look a little different, and that's because we did have that change in allocation as previously discussed because of their operations. Again, seeing that charges for services revenue up for Parks and Recreation. The increases on the expense side, mainly driven by salaries and benefits again. On the Parks and Rec side, if you recall, in 2022, there was still reduced programming, some cancellations. So this is kind of that picture of what a full season looks like and kind of back to normal. For the others, again, we had those positions that haven't been filled or were difficult to fill. So seeing increases there. And then on the public safety side, we did have the addition of the community liaison officer driving that 31% increase, along with the negotiated increases for the contract. Looking at the bottom line, all three funds added back to fund balance. And you could see there next to the unreserved fund balance, the percentage change from last year. So up 45% in public service, 28% in Parks and Rec, and a small decrease in the public safety fund. Any questions on the special revenue funds?
Anything from council? All right, seeing none, thank you.
Got the capital improvement fund here. Again, very similar story, seeing revenue coming in slightly above where you'd expect to be. I do want to point out that you're going to see a new revenue line on there, charges for services. So that represents the first distribution of the sidewalk special assessments from the county. So as we continue to see those, that's where that money will be reported, is that charges for services line there. On the expense side, we got about $6.4 million spent and about $16.4 million sitting on encumbrances, so 98% of the budget either spent or encumbered. Compared to last year, we're up about 33%. And then on pages 4 and 5 of the report, it breaks down that $6.4 million and $16.4 million into capital category and then by individual project. So there's more detail on pages 4 and 5 for the capital improvement fund. Any questions on that?
Colleagues? All right, seeing none.
So now kind of looking at the income tax picture. This is the 3 buckets that we collect in and kind of the percentage increase that we're seeing year over year. So we had planned on that withholding increase. We knew the area was growing, so no real surprise there. On the individual side, we did a little digging, and that does appear to be an anomaly based on one large windfall for an individual taxpayer. So not expecting that to continue into the future, but I would really like to be that taxpayer just because of the windfall. But anyway, on the net profit side, you're seeing a rebound there. So we were negative until this quarter, so starting to see that kind of normalize now and stabilize. So we were expecting that to stay low through the end of 2023, so seeing that maybe stabilize a little bit earlier than we anticipated. Looking at investments, we have about 99% sitting in some sort of security, CD, commercial paper, and Star Ohio, so keeping very little in cash. You saw that our interest revenue was up very high, and as we had previously discussed at the last meeting, that's going to continue probably through the first quarter at least of 2024 before things start to stabilize a little bit. And then looking at the interest rate between the 2 quarters, you also see that there's a smaller span between those. The Fed started raising interest rates like right around March of 2022. So we're kind of seeing that kind of come together a little bit, where we're not seeing as much of a spread between the years. So still anticipating that we're going to keep that investment income coming in pretty high, at least through the first quarter of '24. So in conclusion, we have very similar economic conditions that we had for the second quarter. We have economic expansion going on. We have the labor market, unemployment rate starting to drop, but we still have a pretty tight labor market. There's still more jobs and people actively looking. We have an inverted yield curve, which may suggest some sort of recession, economic slowdown, but again, not anticipating that having a huge impact on the central Ohio area. So just expecting that we're going to continue to see this growth as we move on. End of the quarter in a very good financial position, putting almost $7 million back to fund balance. And we kind of projected that forward to the end of the year, seeing what kind of obligations we had out there, what encumbrances were going on, what we think we would have in payroll through the end of the year. And it looks like we may add back about $2.8 million to the general fund unreserved fund balance at the end of the year. And then as far as going into the future, again, just expecting that revenue, that growth to happen. But again, with growth comes additional expenses. So we're expecting both to continue to increase as we move into the future.
Anything from council? So, Joanne, just a clarifying question, particularly on this conclusion section, when you say expecting return, 2.8 million to the general fund unreserved fund balance, is that your estimate for full fiscal year 2023, or is that just what you see through, I guess, the end of September, the end of Q3?
So it would be the full by the end of the year. That's how much we're anticipating, knowing what we have for the last 3 months of the year coming up.
Okay. Yeah, Ms. Bowers.
Yeah, just one more clarifying kind of on that same point. So what is returned to the unreserved fund balance are unused earmarked funds that may have been included in that year's budget. Is that
Not necessarily. So we plan our resources to come in at a certain level, and that's what we appropriate within. Well, we got more revenue, and we're not planning on using it for 2023, so we never earmarked it for anything.
right?
So it just goes into unreserved fund balance, and then can be used along with next year's revenue to fund appropriations for the following year.
Right. And would it be both, though? It would be both the unearmarked, but also earmarked that wasn't used?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further from council? So, Joanne, you had mentioned economic conditions, a few times throughout the presentation, and this is kind of the time of the year in my industry where people start to look towards, next year and speculate, if you will, as to what the economy might do, because ultimately everything in financial markets kind of flows from there. And in my over decade and a half in the business, I can't recall a time where it's been more sort of 50-50. I mean, it seems half of everyone that's paid to prognosticate about these things thinks that there's risk of recession, and others are saying that no, this is the start of a new wave of growth or phase of growth or something like that. It's as best I can tell, it's a coin toss at this point. But you had mentioned salaries and benefits a few times in the presentation as well, and unemployment. And I think the last unemployment report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, it showed that the unemployment rate actually ticked down after a few months of rising. I think it went from 3.4% to 3.9, and then it went back down to 3.7. So obviously for us, when the bulk of the city's revenue is based on income taxes, a low unemployment rate is certainly favorable for us. So let's hope it continues. With that, anything further with regard to Q3? Okay, thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is to continue our discussion of the fiscal year 2024 budget. I just received one question that was submitted to the administration. I suspect we'll ask them to address that question, but then I'm open to ideas for how best to ultimately make the sausage here. I think we are scheduled to have a public hearing next Monday on the budget, as well as scheduled to vote on it. So I just implore my council colleagues that we're going to need to make some progress on, items that we want to see either removed or added to the budget, and I'm open to ideas. But before we get to that, the first discussion question, or the first and only discussion question I have is, I believe, directed to the Department of Finance. This can be found on page 74 of the budget book. And the ask is to please clarify what's driving the increase in contract services for the Department of Finance, and whether this is tied to the note at the bottom of that page. So I'm assuming, Director Burry, this one's for you.
Yes, that is correct. That is the addition of that division.
Okay. Any follow-up on that?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir. Mr. Weaver.
Thank you, and thank you, Director. So, just to put it in plain English, the note is saying that the contract services increase is to fund projects that are detailed in the mayor's office narrative.
Correct. The division, the department or division of operational administrative services was created to try to pool like more citywide centralized items into their own division to capture that cost differently. But it's still, the mayor still oversees those individuals and still oversees those projects.
Those would be citywide strategic initiatives, the strategical plan, the sustainability plan, things that are citywide.
Yeah, so it's the Franklin County Health contract, the risk and liability insurance program, those types of items.
Okay. I appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
Thank you. So as we've continued our discussion on the budget, I've just kind of jotted down some notes of various items that I guess have generated a lot of debate. And I figured I would just read these off to maybe provide some sort of structure in our subsequent discussion this evening. Early, a couple of weeks ago, there was some conversation about the desire to proceed with a leaf collection pilot program. There's been some discussion around the level of appropriate funding for the CIC that's being asked. There was a question or an ask surrounding the requested appropriation to start the Action Sports Park project. And then there have been a host of questions surrounding staffing in general. Like I said, just trying to put some structure around our discussion. I don't know, do we want to take each one of those items kind of one by one and see if we can generate some form of a consensus up here at the dais? Got a couple of heads nodding? Okay. So leaf collection program. I believe, I heard, I think at a minimum, there was a majority of council that said that that was not something that they wanted to pursue. To the extent that we need to provide the administration with some guidance on what to bring back to us to ultimately vote on the 18th. Any explicit costs associated with that would need to come out of the budget ordinance?
No, I think that evening it was asked explicitly if the maintenance worker one would remain in the budget. Our recommendation was that it would. Okay. I think it does reduce capital by one vacuum machine that we would not be purchasing. We would be planning on, we were planning on purchasing two. We would continue to plan on purchasing one of those vacuums to be used more in the park setting and in some certain situations where it would be advantageous for the Public Service Department to have access to said machine. So there'd be a minimal reduction on the equipment side, but nothing on the staffing side.
Thank you, Director. So is that the will of council to remove that?
Yes.
Okay. All right, you guys have made note of that? All right, perfect, thank you. CIC appropriations, there have been a handful of numbers thrown around. Historically, it's been 200. I think there was some conversation about 3, and then what's in our budget is 500. I'll turn it over to council for a little bit of guidance on this. What's the appetite of council for that particular item? Mr. Weaver.
Chair, thank you. So, I find this a difficult one for me personally, as I am appointed to the board of the CIC, and I can certainly appreciate the work that the CIC does. However, at the end of the day, I am not comfortable with a $500,000 request. The list of expenses that was provided by Director Hammonds, I believe it was earlier today, puts that number around $300,000. That's a number I'm a bit more comfortable with. I understand that the funds that have been previously appropriated have not been used, but are, hoping to be used. So I have that appreciation that, that they would like to use what's been appropriated and what will be appropriated, together. But I'm just not comfortable with the $500,000 amount, and would prefer to see $300,000 or even keep it in line with what's been appropriated previously.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. Colleagues? Anybody agree with that approach? Ms. Bowers?
Yes. Thank you, and thank you, Director Hammonds, for presenting during Committee of the Whole earlier. I noted your optimism that we would see something come forward in Q1. I certainly hope that comes to fruition. It's interesting reflecting on the role of the CIC, the way that it's a quasi-public entity, and the actions that it's taking. It does, and I appreciate everyone who's serving on CIC, and I know that there's a lot of knowledge and professionalism and talent that's sitting in that room, and so I'm very grateful for their service. I do think, though, that ultimately there is a sort of private sector risk that the CIC takes on, and so I think that it is more in line with our responsibilities governing public tax dollars to allocate more conservatively. And then if a specific project comes forward and we continue to perform well, consistent with Director Burry's presentation, perhaps there could be an opportunity for a supplemental appropriation if that becomes apparent next year. I'm hopeful that the grant for the demolition will come forward, and so perhaps expenses will be lower. But similarly, as I asked Director Farrell last week about moderating the actual need for the Action Sports Park, I would be more comfortable with allocating in line with what's actually needed as opposed to over-allocating right now.
Okay. Any additional, some heads nodding? So are we thinking more 300 for CIC? Okay.
Wait, I'm sorry. Are we talking about 200 plus 300, or are we talking about 200 plus 100?
As an absolute dollar figure, I think we're talking about 300 is
So
what I believe is.
200 plus 100.
Correct.
I'm comfortable with that.
I think that kind of gets us to a majority. For the CIC appropriation, what's being requested is an absolute dollar figure of 500. What I'm hearing from a majority of council is they would like that reduced to 300,000 instead of 500,000.
For total with the 2023 money?
The requested appropriation for 2024, I'm hearing is 300,000.
If I may ask a question?
I'm sorry.
May I ask a question?
Yes, sir. Director Hammond.
So the 200,000 would still be available, roll over into 2024, and then you would be appropriating 300,000 for 2024, is that correct?
So that's what my understanding as of right now, anyone can feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here, but the request as it came to us originally would be 500 for 2024,
Correct.
which was in addition to the 200,000 that would roll over,
Correct.
right?
Right.
So,
Okay. Yes, I just want to be, I'm sure I understood. That's all.
okay. Is that comfortable?
That's consistent with what I was saying. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. Yes.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Of course.
Just on the heels of the question that I just asked at the end of the Q3 finance report, I just want to make sure I understand. So we appropriated $200,000 to the 2023 budget for CIC expenditures. CIC has not spent that as of December 12th of 2023. So what does that money, if it's not spent by 12/31, does it come back to the unencumbered, unreserved fund balance?
Well, no, since they're identifying an obligation for it, they're putting it on an encumbrance, and then it rolls over as a purchase order into 2023, is still encumbered. And when
Okay.
you roll over the purchase order, the related appropriations come with it.
Okay. So to, I think, respond to Mr. Renner then, Mr. Renner, it is a $200,000 rollover from 2023's budget in addition to a $300,000 appropriation in the 2024 budget. Is that consistent and something that you're comfortable with? No, I put you on the spot.
Well, so sorry. I'm thinking really slow because I went to bed at 3:30 a.m. So just a point of clarification. What was sent to us in a spreadsheet shows a net loss of just a little bit more than 300,000. Is that an annualized number?
Director Hammonds? That's a full year number, correct?
The expenses and revenues that were given to you today are estimated for 2024. So that number represents activity estimated for 2024. So in effect, some of those expenses that are reflected there could be absorbed through the 2023 amount that's rolled over into 2024, and then provide another balance that could be utilized for eligible expenses as described in the agreement. So I would request, if you so consider, that $200,000 remain available, and then, I guess if we were to operate as we would have annually, we would have asked for another $200,000, and that would have made it $400,000 available for next year. We did ask for an increase because we believe that there will be a lot of activity next year and a lot of opportunity to take advantage of. So that's why, if you would consider $300,000, I think that would be very well spent and utilized for what we think will happen next year.
Mr. Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, thank you, Director. And your comments are well taken. Your comments earlier, well taken as well. But, so you had mentioned, CIC's playing a long game here. These things don't happen overnight, and we're in somewhat unprecedented times. And one reason why I'm supporting the additional to the $300,000 is because of the tax bill, recognizing that is related to the properties that have been purchased as the CIC is working to do what the CIC does.
And I think one other thing to point out is that Councilmember Bowers mentioned the $800,000 grant that we would be very excited to get, and I think we have an opportunity here that's really good, which will initiate development, making those lots more saleable, but there is a commitment on behalf of the CIC because there is a match to that. So that's another expense that is kind of hanging out down there. If the grant comes, there will be that added expense, and their participation would be required. So I think taking that into consideration, that, that opportunity is one we don't want to miss.
Mr. Renner, any follow-up?
Yeah, thank you.
What's really bothering me is what I stated very clearly in CIC. CIC is holding a negative number because of an obligation for a contractor that was supposed, or developer, that was actually supposed to do something. I made it very clear at CIC, I never want to see that developer again. I warned everybody that this was tanking in December of 2022, and then there we are where we are. So I don't want to reward. And that's where I'm struggling. How do we put some safeguards in this that we provide the CIC with direction, with funding to appropriately go through, but I do not want to reward for that said developer to come back and say, okay, great.
Well, I don't think that with all due respect, I don't think the monies that we're asking for is any way going to reward a particular developer, whether it's that one or one that we're negotiating with. All we're trying to do is make the best deal that we can with whomever it is that will do the developments that we, as a community, desire, including council and along with the CIC. I think the relationship between the CIC and the council and the city administration and the city as a whole, it's not a we and an us, or it's not an us and a they, it's a we. I mean, economic development's a very difficult thing to do. And sometimes we just have to manage it the best we can for the time period that we're in. And I think for the most part, they've done a pretty good job at that, considering, I know development companies that have just gone out of business. I have friends that are looking for jobs because it's a very tough time. But the conversations we've had with other developers, I feel very excited and enthused about what's on the horizon. So, I don't think we're rewarding anyone. We're going to have to use all the tools that are in the toolbox when we do a development, whether that's developer A, B, C, the ones that we've been working with, or a newcomer. We have a meeting scheduled actually this Friday with another developer that I'm very hopeful will take all the property that we have. So can I make any guarantees? I can't, but all I can say is I'm very enthusiastic. And this particular project is one of the reasons I took this job. So I've never failed anywhere that I've ever been, and I don't intend to fail here, but it does take a lot of hard work together with the CIC and council and the administration to pull it off. That's my speech.
I understand, and it's well taken, and your points are certainly valid. It's just that council has no control what CIC, actually who CIC is actually going to contract with.
I don't think that we would enter into any agreement unless the council is supportive of that.
Do not want that developer, period.
Understood.
All right, so just want to bring it back to dollars and cents here real quick. At a minimum in the last budget cycle, there was a $200,000 per year run rate to go to the CIC for land acquisition and development. If I'm not mistaken, I believe our capital improvement plan that was passed earlier this year had a likewise $200,000 sort of flatline number year over year over year. The ask from the administration was to step that up from 200 to 500, and council is asking the administration, let's bring that down to 300 instead of 500. So it's a net step up of $100,000 for 2024. Does that sound like what everybody's coalescing around? Okay. I don't know who's keeping track of the changes. Okay, Miranda? Okay. I just want to make sure. Okay. Oh.
Thank you very much. I appreciate
Thank you. All right. Just want to cross one item off the list here. All right.
So it's going to be roll over
3.
2 and give them 3.
Yep. Yes, as far
Thank
as
you
we're
very
concerned,
much.
yeah, as far as we're concerned for appropriations, it's 300. Next one that I have on the list, it was briefly mentioned or referenced earlier, is the Action Sports Park. Searching for it, I believe the ask is for, you know, a roughly $660,000 figure. I believe the context around that number is that is roughly half of the anticipated expense. And the ask was more that that be brought lower to sort of the planning and development actual costs, or as close as we can get from an estimated standpoint. So,
Yes,
Mr. Schultz, I see you nodding your head there.
Quickly to do the math here, right, in the capital improvement plan for 2024 and 2025, there was $1.275 million in total. It was roughly split in half. We're going to reduce the 2024 appropriation to $300,000, if that's amenable to you folks, and then carry the balance of that, which takes you to $975,000 into 2025. And obviously, we would right-size that budget once we had design and cost estimates and those types of things available to us, which would come out of the $300,000 portion of the project that we would do in '24.
Thank you, Director Schultz. So to summarize, council, that's the Action Sports Park line item in the capital improvement plan, or coming from the capital improvement fund, sorry. That goes from $662,500 down to $300,000. Is that amenable to everybody?
Yes.
Ms. Bowers?
Yes, I just want to make sure that we're level setting, that we're approving 300 for this year, and then we'll evaluate where the project is for the next cycle, next budget cycle.
Correct.
Appreciating that the CIP does anticipate a certain dollar amount. I just continue to encourage that we look for private support for this project. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anything further from council on that item? All right, thank you. Crossing it off the list. All right, that brings me to, I think, really what's kind of dominated our discussion so far, which is just the concept of staffing in general. Admittedly, I don't know how best to really structure this portion of our conversation, other than to just share my thoughts as I have pondered it myself, which is kind of to take the low-hanging fruit. There are a number of positions that really don't give me much heartburn at all. And those are, there is a maintenance worker 1 in Parks and Recreation that it was explained is going to replace 2 part-time positions and effectively be cost neutral. I personally don't have any concern over that one. I believe the SRO funding request, that is part of a longer-term succession plan. All right, see the chief nodding his head in the back there? Yes, Director?
That is not correct. That is an add of an SRO. There is an SRO retiring at the end of this year, but he's already been replaced. So there are currently 3 SROs. This is for an addition of 4, so there would be 4 SROs.
All right.
Mr. Chair, if I might.
Yeah, sure, Mr. Weaver.
So, but this is also this role would be paid for in part by the school district.
The chief can come speak to that.
Sorry to make you walk from the back, Chief.
Current SRO staffing is at 4 because we have a known retirement that's coming up. And based on the school year, we have temporarily added an SRO, so we're at 4. By contract, the school pays for the cost associated with the 2 SROs that are anchored at the high school. By contract, they only service Gahanna Lincoln High School. With the 3rd SRO, they provide services to the middle schools and the elementary schools and also our private schools. The 4th SRO, and the reason to add is to provide some level of relief factor, because if only 1 SRO is off, if we're in the middle of an in-service training week, we have to adjust those schedules, and something within the school district, something within the city goes unfilled, because we still have to maintain 2 at the high school at all times. So when there's training and we're at 3, if somebody takes a sick day, then we're down to only servicing the high schools, and those calls for service and those things that SROs are really problem interdiction as opposed to responding to calls for service. So those calls have to be handled by somebody, and it's a patrol unit that may not be familiar with the school setting, may not be familiar with the staff, the many challenges that we have within the school. So this position is not going to be funded by the school district. It is simply a relief factor ask.
Appreciate the clarification.
But to Mr. Weaver's point, it looks like that cost expense will be defrayed by the public safety fund.
That's correct. The SROs, the community liaison officer, their salaries come out of issue $12.
Perfect. Which, yeah, as long as those funds have been in existence, I think that's kind of been the purpose of them or how they've been utilized. So
Yes.
while we're having a discussion or debate, whatever you want to frame it, I personally don't have a lot of heartburn with that position. Okay. While you're there, Chief, two more that fall under the Division of Police. There were the two sergeants. There was some discussion about some chain of command concerns or lack thereof. Under our current staffing, this would remediate those, as well as, you know, some safety concerns as well. So again, the two sergeants, I don't have any heartburn over. If anyone disagrees with that, feel free to speak up. Okay.
Wait, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Ms. Bedova.
Can I just ask a question about that? Are these aren't like promoting officers to sergeant? This would be new sergeants added, correct?
So we would add 2 additional sergeants positions through a promotional process, and then we would backfill.
Okay.
Eventually, we would backfill those officers that are promoted to sergeant.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Can I have,
Yeah, Mrs. McGregor.
I don't see it here, but were there also two patrol officers added? Or was it, I seeing the sergeants? Am I?
There are 2 vacant vacancies currently from 2 retirements this year. And so there is an additional police officer for next year for a known retirement as well. So when officers, they're not required to, but sometimes they do give us advance notice of their retirement, sometimes a year to 2 years early. We overlap the funding because of the time it takes to hire and train those officers. So that we had a recruit start the academy today. So we still have 2 current vacancies from 2023 that have not been filled and will not be filled until we do the next round of applications.
But there's not 2 new positions outside of those being at, it was,
No.
probably what I saw was the police sergeants that, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else for PD? All right, Chief, I think you can go back to the back of the room now. The other ones that I had on my list that, again, did not give me much cause for concern was the building and heating inspector in the Department of Planning. And the way that it was explained from the administration is that is, again, sort of a redundancy or the need for redundancy there, as well as concerns about succession, trying to maintain some of the institutional knowledge that we have in the event that the members that are in those positions were to move on or retire down the road. So anybody feel differently about that one? Mrs. McGregor?
The only question I have is it was presented that, you know, that somebody would retire and then we would have somebody to fill in, but how do you know that that person you hire will be the person to replace somebody that retires or leaves? I mean, it doesn't, they might not be the person you want to hire, and then we've hired 2. Then we would have hired 1 plus, you know.
So I discussed that with the fleet technician. The building inspector position has the potential to be cost neutral through the fees at the city have not been changed since early 2000s, so there'll be fee schedule adjustments coming forward next year with the increase in fees and then the reduction of third-party building inspector contracts. We anticipate that to be very close to cost neutral.
Okay.
The succession, this is for succession planning as well, but the fleet technician was for, that was a temporary increase in one to come back down in 2025 with those planned retirements.
That makes more sense to me than succession, because you hire somebody not knowing how they're going to do the job, and will they be the appropriate person to backfill somebody who's retired? And it just that didn't make much sense to me, so, thank you.
Yeah, maybe succession is not the right word to describe it, but I think redundancy was perhaps what was thrown around. I mean, it is just one person, right? And then everything else is contracted out?
Correct, and if you'll notice in the salary ordinance, I don't know if I mentioned or not, but the current building inspector did a job audit through our consultant, and they recommend moving him to a residential plans examiner, because that's what he does the vast majority of his time. He doesn't actually do any building inspection work. So this would really be to have our own staff member to do building inspection work, instead of relying on our third-party consultants that can only do building inspections on 2 days a week between certain hours.
The other, just kind of moving on, again, these are my own notes. Director Vollmer had touched on the fleet technician. Again, that was, I think it was expressly stated that was for succession planning purposes. And then in the same vein, there were the 2 fleet interns to try and build up that skill set. I had, again, no issue with fleet technician or the 2 fleet interns in public service. Hearing nothing from council. And then the last ones on my list were the maintenance worker that are being paid out of the proprietary funds. Other than that, I felt like everything was essentially up for debate. And so I'll just kind of open it up to, Mr. Renner.
I do have just go back. I think you began this with a parks maintenance worker.
Yes, sir.
Could you be a little bit more specific? Which one are we talking about? There's a parks maintenance worker for the golf course. There's also another one listed.
If I may, I have slides prepared that I can show you all these positions. I did rank order them as requested at the last meeting.
To answer your question specifically, Mr. Renner, it was the golf course one, which I have as, my notes say it was replacing 2 part-time. But if you guys believe that Director Vollmer's presentation would be beneficial, we can have her put it up on the screen.
No, thank you so much.
Okay. Director Vollmer, you want to toss it up on the screens? We have something to work off of?
Sure. Do you just want the prioritized list, or do you want me to do the presentation that was prepared based on the last conversation?
Is this new information in the presentation?
Some of the information is new,
Then, let's hear it.
and there are recommendations at the end.
Okay.
Okay. Well, sorry, it'd be helpful if I started at the correct slide. So first, I just wanted to cover very briefly how it is in which we produce the staffing budget. So in June of each year, the finance director and the budget analyst prepares master staffing sheet that includes current vacancies and current employees at the city. Then towards the end of June, I send out instructions to all departments to begin staffing discussions. And then in July, we meet with staff members, and these are the questions that are sent to each director and manager so that they can plan for their 5-year staffing as well as the current year staffing. And I will provide this information to Clerk Van Meter afterwards to provide to you as well. So during those meetings in July and August, we ask those questions from the previous slide in detail for those directors to answer. The senior directors and senior deputy director then review all requests and changes. We held a meeting with the mayor for final recommendations. After approval by the mayor, we do send those approval requests to finance to incorporate into the 2024 budget. After this is done, is when directors start beginning to put together their budgets as well. Considerations for the 2024 request were to ensure proper workload for employees so departments can be proactive instead of reactive. Additional considerations were made for increased capital projects and initiatives to ensure employees are working within their classification and not above or below. reduce the city's risk by not having proper supervision of employees, removing administrative tasks from directors so focus can continue to shift to leading departments and planning for the future. We discussed the move to 825 Tech Center and the impact on current staffing, including technology needs and facility needs. And we also discussed the retention of current employees. We also discussed the one-time initiatives and the positions that will be responsible for these initiatives. So for the strategic plan, there's a variety of folks, as well as the sustainability plan, the Creekside camera study, the aquatics master plan, the economic development strategy, and the public service code updates. These are general fund one-time initiatives for next year. These are the one-time initiative for the public service fund. The vast majority of these fall under the engineering department. So as requested at the last meeting, there was a request to order the positions in which the administration felt that they needed to be funded. So the next series of slides goes into each one of these, and if there's funding tied to them, I'm happy to proceed or not proceed. I also have a slide of the positions that are requested that are not in the general fund. Those are not prioritized, they're just listed on a future slide. Would you like me to continue, or?
Yeah, I think we're kind of waiting for the payoff, which is the rank order.
This is the rank order.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay.
We do have recommendations for deferrals at the end as well. If there are questions about any of these specific positions, I do have detailed slides. Some of them include different projects they were going to work on in that one-time initiative list.
Could I see the recommended deferral slide? And maybe we can come back to this one, but I'd like to see that too.
So the positions, there are two slides. So the positions recommended to defer are the IT support specialist 2, marketing and communications specialist, management analyst 2, reduce police sergeant funding to 50%. As you may or may not know, there's a comprehensive civil service exam that's required under civil service rules and the collective bargaining agreement. It will take the HR team at least the first quarter and most of the second quarter in order to complete that process. And so in reality, there's not a need to fund them 100% of the year because we cannot promote anybody on January 1st. There is not a current eligible list for a police sergeant. And then the mental health liaison, we have offered that position at least 3 times and has been declined. And so Chief Spence has requested to move those dollars to contract services to use an outside contractor to provide those services to the community. In addition, with those positions to defer, we would be requesting to defer the $150,000 for the sustainability plan. We see that there may be increased timelines for the strategic plan, economic development plan, and code updates. For grants in particular, we would rely on consultants, which could result in the loss of opportunities. There would be increased response time by the IT department for critical functions, such as policing and seasonal operation. This also causes lost productivity time to employees. Community engagement and communication relating to city business and plans may be delayed. And we would also request then to add $100,000 for a 5-year staffing study to be conducted for the police department and city staff. That staffing request would also take into consideration the move to 825 Tech Center. For example, that's a much larger facility than this, and right now we contract out our cleaning crews and custodians, so we would need to study whether or not to bring that in-house or keep it as a consultant as well. Happy to go back to any slide that you would like to see.
I just jotted down some quick notes, and I'm happy to open it up for conversation or discussion here in just a second, but a few things based on some of the recommendations. Some just quick observations. So 50% funding for sergeant. For me, it makes no difference whether we fully fund it this year or we do half this year and we come back with a supplemental in 2024 or in 2025. I think what you've heard from council is we're comfortable with the positions. We recognize that the need or the demand is there, and ultimately it will get funded. It's just a matter of timing. So for me, it's almost a microcosm of the broader concern, I think, is the run rate over time. It's not necessarily the 2024 appropriation so much as it is what are we committing to in 2024 and how that carries in 25, 26, 27, and so forth and so on. So again, just an observation there. There was, again, a recommendation to move the mental health liaison from a staffed position to contract services. In a similar vein, they're still spending the dollars. So net, I'm not sure that it does much for the budget. But if that's a recommendation, I don't have any beef with it. And then I do have, I guess, a question about grants. The slide said that the risk of continuing to use a third party was the loss of opportunities. I'm curious, sort of what's the logic behind that? Because in my professional experience, sometimes using a third party, they are aware of other means or other opportunities that might be out there. So is it a capacity issue with whoever we're using as a consultant, or are they just not, I guess, good enough at their job?
We have a consultant, and we are using that consultant. However, the management analyst would have been responsible to manage that consultant and then collect information. We're using a consultant who's identifying funding. However, Deputy Director Weibensinger is then contacting all the fine folks behind me to then coordinate all the paperwork, all the information that needs submitted. Sometimes these are tight turnarounds, so they're dropping what they're doing to collect all those information. Without the additional of a staffing person, we'll continue to operate the same way we are with grants. For example, Director Schultz the other day found out a grant was due, so he dropped everything he was doing to fill out the information with Director Comlek, who had to pull a bunch of information together. There's just not a proactive approach we can do with the staffing that we have currently.
Okay.
And the consultant basically, I mean, they're going to prioritize what it is that we tell them to prioritize. So if we don't know of an opportunity, yeah, the grant consultant talks to us about what types of opportunities are out there, so on and so forth. But I know that I got two past my desk, one this morning and one this afternoon, that I know that we haven't talked to the grant consultant about. So there are other opportunities out there that they are extremely tight turnaround times. The Transportation Improvement District grant that Director Vollmer just spoke about, that needed a turnaround time in 3 weeks. And then we got a second submittal that was due, I think, 2 weeks after that for the second round. So you really need to be on top of these things in order to submit and make a quality submission at that particular point in time. And when she says I had to drop what I was doing, I had to drop what I was doing to make sure that, we submitted for a $500,000 grant to study Stigler-Agler in 62. And that's how we do a little bit of prioritization. But if there was somebody more dedicated to the effort, then that would be that person's responsibility to know what was coming up, why and how, and make sure that those things were applied for appropriately.
So just to follow up on that, I think the discussion to this point, at least the way I've heard it, and I could be mistaken, has been we're using a grant consultant now. We want to bring it in-house, as if it's an either-or. It sounds like what's being proposed is in addition to. So we would still use the grant consultant to identify those sort of high-value opportunities, but this additional individual that's being requested would basically manage that relationship so that the directors do not have to. Is that an accurate summation or summary of what is being asked for?
In addition, the management analyst, once we get a grant, there's financial compliance that has to be done. There's paperwork that has to be filed. So this person would house all of that information and get all the information from finance, from whomever else they need to in the city, and maintain that compliance piece as well.
And I think what you would see is in 2024, yeah, we're probably still relying on the grant consultant to a degree, but as this person gets onboarded and is more seasoned in how to do their job and what grants to look for and those types of things, you decrease the amount of external third-party services that are rendered and you increase the internal, depending on exactly how how things prioritize and shake out. And while Director Vollmer says that there is one primary grant consultant, there's also a second one that we're dealing with as it relates to economic development opportunities. So there's two consultants there, and then there's even some, I guess what I would refer to as pro bono work that's being done by a member of the Parks Board in order to identify some of these opportunities. These opportunities are out there, but the staff does not have time to identify them, understand what the timing is, and then apply for them in a fashion that actually makes us competitive to the rest of the state of Ohio and or the country in order to secure some of these funds. Baker Tilly's also working on some things as it relates to 825. So, I mean, there's a plethora of opportunity out there that frankly, in years past, we've left on the table. I know since I've been in this particular position, I know the grants that I've seen run through our particular office and which ones get applied for. Director Comlang did not state in his report for the roundabout, but I believe that was about a $1 million grant that was applied for and awarded for the roundabout project. So these are not small opportunities. These are not small opportunities, and it takes a considerable amount of overhead, administrative overhead, in order to apply for them and then to ultimately administer them and make sure that the compliance is done appropriately, because the grant consultant goes away, they don't do compliance for us.
I'd like to also state that the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission has this availability to work for those grants as well.
Correct.
And that's what they like to do.
Yep.
And that's what we have, a wonderful opportunity to potentially make that happen from that position.
Correct, and they coordinate on our behalf, and I would agree with that.
Oh, okay,
But then there's still work that we need to do.
Exactly, well,
right?
of course, but it could be, if you're looking for something specific, they may be able to find it as well, because that's,
Correct.
they have that job.
Right. And the EV charging stations that we applied for 825 Tech Center Drive, I belong to say we applied for $750,000, and that was part of a regional grant package that MORPC had presented us with. There was a regular Monday meeting that talks about funding opportunities, so on and so forth, that both Director Comlank and Director Farrell, they attend that meeting regularly. The opportunities are out there again, but there's not the resource and the time in which it takes in order to give these things their just due. And this is just one example of the long list that Director Vollmer has gone through as to what the MA2 would be supporting.
Comments from council with regard to Director Vollmer's presentation or any of the positions that we've discussed so far? Mr. Weaver.
Just a very quick clarifying question. Is there a specific dollar amount we're trying to get this reduced by?
I've not heard any.
Do you or any of my colleagues have a specific dollar amount that we should be trying to aim for here that will make folks happy?
I personally don't, but.
Well, I guess maybe I should rephrase. Is there a dollar amount that, so the headache, as I understand it, is the chart that's on Roman numeral 2. And where expenses run over time and trying to get that number down. And I guess maybe this is a question for Director Burry. Is there a dollar amount that this appropriation for this budget would help to keep that number, that chart in check, for lack of better explanation?
Well, like I said, that chart is prepared, based on what we're currently experiencing, and it's updated every year based on actual results. So I'd hate to throw a number out there when this number is outdated as soon as we publish the book. But looking at our current operations and where we currently are landing for 2024, we're in good shape. We're not asking to use any fund balance, even though we have it available to us. Our general fund balance is obviously very large. We do need to start using that. That's our jobs, to give those dollars back to the people. So I would not want to throw a number out there. I tried to explain that 5-year and what it does for us. And when I look at that 5-year chart, I think we're in pretty good shape. That curve line is not dipping down anywhere. At the end of that 5-year cycle, we're still fairly close to the top, which is telling me that as we go through the years pending anything happening outside of our control, we're going to be in a pretty good financial position. Even if we were to use that 5-year projection as a baseline, during those 4 years, we're barely touching fund balance.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Ms. Bowers?
Yes, Chair. Just referring to the positions to defer, I appreciate Director Vollmer, you bringing this to us. So it looks to me like there is approximately $145,000 that we can eliminate from those positions by striking those top 3 items.
I'd have to do the math. $145,000 is.
$345,000, excuse me.
I don't have that spreadsheet pulled up.
It's on the spreadsheet that was provided by Director Vollmer. There's the marketing and communication specialist with total budget of $108,650. The management analyst 2 out of finance with a total budget of $124,819, and an IT support specialist $108,650. So if I'm roughly, it's about $340,000 that would come off of that. Beyond that, I would tend to agree with Chair Schnetzer that it's really the long-term planning that kind of is top of my mind. So if we can more correctly state the budget for the sergeant, taking into consideration that we wouldn't actually staff it until mid-year, then we can adjust the budget accordingly. And then, Chief, I'll leave it to you with the mental health liaison. However, that's a really important position, and I think you know how much the council supports that position. If you think that we'll be better able to staff it by moving that to a contract position, I would defer to your judgment on that. However, I would just note that given Director Farrell's comments, and I know it's not the same, but Director Farrell's comments that employees are seeking benefits, I would be concerned that further removing that from a career trajectory would give me a little bit of concern.
Yeah, so we've gone through 3 hiring phases to try to fill this position. We kind of reevaluated after the last one, and also some of these conversations involve Mifflin Township as well, because they're going to pay a portion of this. It's going to service both agencies. My best guess, this is a very difficult position to fill because we're bringing somebody who essentially is coming into a role by themselves. Clinicians, they work in hospital settings, they work in groups where they have many coworkers that are of different training and experience in that wide spectrum of mental health services. This is unique, and it's trying to find a very unique person. The request to move it to contract services is following some models of some other area agencies who are currently contracting with Centero. Marysville is one, Dublin is another. Programs are very similar, but it's allowing those expert clinicians to be available to us, but also have the support mechanisms and the training and the resources of a broader mental health service. So I think this is needed because we've kind of languished for a while trying to get this program off the ground. And there's some already proven track record with these other 2 agencies using a contracted service. So I think this is a good direction to go. And I think it will save some dollars, hopefully, in the long run. And maybe we come back and in a future budget year ask for that employee to, as an internal employee. But I think this is the fastest way to get this program launched and get those services out to the community.
All right, thank you, Chief. Back to the new positions that are requested. I think the interns, if departments do not feel that they want or need an intern, I would defer to that discretion. It's certainly not a major impact to the budget. I know for council office, it's a support that we would very much like to see in council office. I would like very much to see that intern. I know it's a discussion that we've had, and I think it would be of great benefit to council office. The maintenance worker 2 in Parks and Rec, under Park Services, I believe that was identified as Arbor, and I believe that that's tied directly to a street tree program that has been emphatically requested by council members. I would be inclined to support and fund that position.
Just to ask clarification, that is associated with the street tree program?
That is correct.
All right.
And then again, to me, we have sort of a hierarchy of priorities that I think the residents have requested of us. And I know that you all are aligned with that. And so just continuing to make sure that the positions that are being prioritized align with those priorities: public safety, roads and public service, and then addressing mobility, walkability, sustainability initiatives, and housing initiatives. I believe those are consistent with the community's expectations. Thank you.
Mrs. McGregor, did I see your hand up?
You have positions to defer the management analyst. Is that the one, but that would be doing the grants, though?
Correct.
It seems like that would be maybe one I would not want to defer, because if you look at, sometimes you have to pay a little money to make money. And spend a little money to make money is what I guess what I want to say. But if we're pulling directors and administrative people to do grants, when we could hire somebody, and I don't mean this, but a person that was their job, was to do grants. And instead of pulling people from all of the directors away from their other jobs to do a grant all of a sudden, and I know the grants come, it's like 3 weeks, and then you've got to do all the paperwork, you've got to watch how the money's spent, you've got to, all that stuff. It seems like that might be to me, that would be money well spent to have somebody who was looking after grants. Maybe that's just me, but
There are many grants out there, millions of dollars, billions of dollars, and they're just waiting.
But to me, it seems like that position would be, we've been real successful in getting grants, but, I think that to have our top administrative people stopping their work to do a grant is not a wise use, to me. Not that they don't do a good job, I'm just saying, it seems like they could be doing other better things.
So if I may, Ms. Badova, I saw your hand up. Is it related to this particular position?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, please.
I think I agree with Ms. McGregor here. It seems like if we had somebody working on this, this position would pay for itself a little bit in grants. Do you guys feel like we would likely get $125,000 worth of grants?
Yes.
More than what we're getting currently?
Yes.
So I think that if that's the case, then I don't think that is a position that we should cut. Hopefully it would pay for itself and then some.
That's all? All right, Mr. Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Echo Mrs. McGregor and Ms. Badova, but I would just add that I was really happy to see in the budget an allocation for the sustainability plan. And my understanding, and thank you for having that slide up just a second ago for management analyst too. You took it away just as I needed it. That this role would be directly tied to that, and I think it goes hand in hand with the grant funding. So I would oppose removing this role from the budget just because of the amount of projects that it would be touching, particularly the sustainability plan and implementation, and having that direct report of someone working directly on that that can work with you to come before us and also report directly to the administration on the progress, in addition to the grants.
So if I could just add to that for a second, you're absolutely correct. I think that's the right conversation to be having. Sustainability will add to the list that Ms. Bowers just gave us as to what the priorities of the community are. And then in subsequent years, who manages the sustainability plan and who is in charge of implementing the sustainability plan? What does it do to capital? And what is the cascade on, the proceedings that are happening here tonight around the budget and around staffing on how some of these things get accomplished when we have a large-scale initiative like sustainability. This person, the MA2, would be in charge of managing the sustainability plan. But as you see on the list there, grants is relatively far down the list there. Do we think that we can get one grant and secure the $125,000 and pay for this person? Yes, absolutely. But in many other places and in many other communities, there is a dedicated grants person that functions in that particular regard. There's a dedicated sustainability person that functions in that regard because these are large-scale initiatives that when Director Vollmer talked about the questions that we talked at the beginning, right? We've taken these positions and we've crafted something in a fashion that we think is more palpable for you guys to ultimately fund, as opposed to, just saying one of these, and one of those. And that's the process that we've gone through. So
On this particular position, I'm a bit torn. And here's what I've heard is so you've got me on we get one grant and essentially the position pays for itself. No argument. If that was the only piece of information that you had, you would think that this would be a no-brainer. But what's listed in here, and presumably this is in the order of priority, sustainability plan and implementation. I just heard Director Schultz say that the grants is far down the list, so.
It's one of many items on the list. If I misspoke, it's one of many items on the list.
Okay. Sustainability plan, we've done that without this position. Strategic plan, we've done that without this position. We've done land use plan without this position. We've done any number of plans in this community as long as I've lived here, many of which unfortunately do not get fully implemented, that sit on a shelf. And I don't know, I figured the way I'm looking at this is ultimately they're getting done without this position. I guess my ask would simply be grants be moved, toward the top of the list on what this person would do. I think that would change the ROI dynamic as opposed to creating a lot of documents that, again, and that's not to disparage anyone in this room. A lot of these plans were conducted long before anybody here was affiliated with the city, but we just don't have the best track record of always fully utilizing the plans that we have.
If I could, and just to reiterate, I don't think these are listed in an order of priority. I think they're just listed. To clarify, Director Schultz, one of the things I just want to mention about the strategic plan, we had Go Forward Gahanna. It's a plan that was created, it was implemented. The problem was there was nobody to manage it. So when the time came to go back and look at the data and the metrics around where were we in the actual implementation of that plan, there were none because there wasn't somebody to manage that plan and to track those results. So that is something that this role would do as well. Creating the plan is one thing, and then implementing it, but then tracking that progress and making sure that we are meeting those goals and objectives that are set forth in the strategic plan is just as much an equal part of having that plan designed in the first place. And that has been something that we have not, to your point, done a good job in doing because we haven't had somebody to do that. This is another function that position would have.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Saw your hand go up, Ms. Bowers. Is it related to this position?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, so it's related to this position insofar as, and I appreciate the conversation, and I think it's an important conversation to have. I think the thing that it is coming back to the budget and our role and us trying to evaluate based on information you're telling us the things that could be deferred. So this management analyst position was on your deferral list in the top 3. And now I'm understanding that that's not something that should be deferred for good reason. So what I'm looking at, and I appreciate, Director Burry, as Chair Schnetzer pointed out, you're prudently conservative in your forecasts. But from what I can tell from the chart on Roman numeral small I, 2I, there is an approximate $4 million gap between revenue and expenses on the general fund. And so I think what we're trying to identify is how do we start to narrow that so that we are not looking at that projection. The unreserved fund balance that hasn't been spent down, I understand that needs to get spent. I get that. But as we're looking at being fiscally responsible for our taxpayers, what are the positions that we've asked you to prioritize? You've given us prioritization, and then the top 3 items that you told us you could defer, you're telling us that we really shouldn't defer one of them.
We are recommending that none get deferred, but at the last meeting, you asked us to prioritize a list, so we prioritized a list, and the ones I recommended to defer were just a deferral. You would likely see those again come up in future staffing years. We were trying to meet the needs of prioritizing the list and recommending deferrals as we deem necessary based on current workload of city staff and current projects.
I would say we jumped from the list, the one slide that you have of the prioritization to the deferrals, and we're happy to go through and identify and explain to you why this is the order of priority, so to speak, that you asked us to do from last week, and why this would be the order we would put those positions in terms of their importance to carrying out, to your point, Councilwoman, the objectives and the goals of the community that they have articulated to us. Parks and trails and walkability, that speaks directly to the very first position listed on this chart. And we could go through all of those if you'd like us to do that.
Well, I do want to jump in here real quick because this has come up a couple of times. Mr. Weaver and Ms. Bowers are talking about the sort of the long-run projection, and none of us really know what the future holds, but I think it is incumbent upon us to be as conservative as we can with what is the baseline. I mean, as soon as we add staff, it is, and I've gone through this in this position or in this role, it's very difficult to cut. I'll just say that we can't be all things to every person in the community. There's a lot of demands, and we need to budget in the verb sense of the word. And I think Ms. Bowers put it very succinctly a few committees ago. We'll ultimately be responsible to the residents the next time the ballot box comes around. I'm not necessarily sitting here trying to pick and choose, projects per se, but it is through that sort of prism or that framework that I'm trying to wrap my head around what is absolutely necessary or what projects can be moved, down the years. We're talking about deferring staff positions. Well, are there certain projects that can necessarily be deferred that would allow a much more modest add of staff to handle? It's almost kind of like the pig and the python. It's like we've got this, a ton of projects that we're trying to jam through in a short window of time, and can those be spread out or deferred over a longer period of time that would allow, again, a much more, modest addition of staffing to handle. So anyway, I'll stop there, but I don't know, does anyone else have any additional thoughts or comments about where we are right now with regard to the staffing debate? Mrs. Padova?
So, the slide that you had just a minute ago for the management analysts, do you have one of those for the maintenance worker for public service.
Yes, I do. You talking about the one that's split 25% in the proprietary funds? That maintenance worker? There are a few. The one that says maintenance worker streets?
I'm looking at this.
What department is that?
Public service.
Yep, here you go.
Under,
This is
yeah,
the-
street superintendent. Yeah.
This is the maintenance worker one for streets. These are some of the initiatives Director Anvers and his crew are working on currently.
Thank you.
Director, can I have?
Mrs. Angelou.
Thank you. I'm really sitting here, and I'm looking at all these people out here, and Ms. Burry, who I trust, and Miranda, and all these people, and I'm talking about trust. Do you feel that all of these things that are here would automatically go through 24 the way we have it? If we're not taking anything back, do you think that it would be something that would make the people not like us anymore, or the fact that we really can't do it? I know that there's some things. I'm a conservative person with the fact that there could be more problems with everything that's going on in the world. Now, I just want to say, do you think that if you wanted all of these to do, it would be nothing, that we would have to come back and give you more money? I want to trust. I don't think we're all trusting what's happening here. These are the people that do the work, and I just want to bring it up as to, we're trying to take things out of this, and yet I look at it and I think, well, gee, but maybe we can find other ways to do it. But I don't see it as anything that's going to be I think it's going to be easy to keep it going. And when the people in Gahanna see all the wonderful things that are happening, they're going to be really happy too. Just a thought.
So I do want to clarify, it's not a trust issue for me. Never has been, and hopefully never will be. It's more a question of what's sustainable over a 20-year horizon. And I think that's the quintessential question that we're trying to answer here. For lack of a better path forward, I think there are a handful of positions where I think we at least have a majority of council that are okay with. I'm adding the management analyst to that list. I believe essentially what we're seeing with regard to fleet, some of these are going to be repetitive. Building and heating inspector, are the sergeants are okay? Okay, all right. Maintenance worker in Parks and Recreation for the golf course, the SRO, and then there is, I believe, Miranda, correct me if I'm wrong, there are 4 quarter FTEs that add up to 1 that are paid out of the enterprise funds. Is that the way to read those 4 at the bottom of this sheet? This is
Yeah, the maintenance worker streets that Ms. Padova was just questioning is split 25% between street, stormwater, water, and sewer.
And then there was maintenance worker 2 for the Parks and Recreation Department that is part of the tree program. As I have the tally right now, that seems to be a consensus. I'm certainly, if anyone disagrees with that, please speak up. Because what I think we'll do is just attack the rest of them kind of line by line. I'll work up from the bottom. Administrative assistant in engineering, and then there's an intern in engineering. Any input on those positions?
Sure. I don't have a slide for the interns.
Okay.
Director Comlat can come talk about the Morpsey intern. Ruth that was here last summer did great work for the engineering department. We usually source most of our interns through the Morpsey program, so they're here from May until August. One of our last interns actually then joined the Parks and Rec team in a part-time capacity in a vacancy we had until the end of the semester. An intern that we had, Morpsey intern over the summer that assisted in finance, really fleet all over the city, really. He will be continuing next year at about 10 hours a week as well. So I don't have a lot more information on those interns. They aren't a huge cost, but welcome to reduce them if you so choose. For the administrative assistant in engineering, again, I talked earlier about that fee schedule change. One of those changes coming forward is for the right-of-way administration. So when that fee is increased, that'll help offset the cost of this position. In addition, the street and sidewalk program support, just the mailers and the accounts payable and accounts receivable specifically for the sidewalk program is a huge task for the engineering team. I have listed here other items that they'll do. They'll also support the 2024 initiatives, which I had on a prior slide. I think they total over $1 million for engineering. Currently, there's little management of the ADA transition plan, so we need to keep that on its track as well. And then with the street and sidewalk, most specifically the sidewalk program, there are numerous calls into that department. So this position would take the intake for those engineering topics, specifically the sidewalk program, whether that comes via email or phone call into the engineering department. If there are additional questions, Director Schultz or Director Comlet can comment further.
So looking at the org chart for engineering, there's an administrative coordinator that sits, at least the way it's positioned in the org chart.
Correct.
Beneath that requested position.
So the one of the plans is during next year, we have one individual in the entire city that does the bid processes for the entire city. That is a fundamental problem that we need to resolve, and so that individual we would look at promoting to that pay grade to assist with those bid processes for the entire city. And then the administrative tasks that person would doing would fall back down to this administrative assistant.
So
there would be 2 engineering program technicians.
I thought your question was about the administrative coordinator and the distinction.
Yeah, it was. There's an administrative, so the way the org chart shows for this was on your original staffing presentation, apologies, within engineering is you have Senior Director of Operations, Director of Engineering, and then the requested position of Administrative Assistant. Beneath that, presumably the way this correct, yeah, is an Administrative Coordinator.
Correct. That administrative coordinator we would look to promote to an engineering program coordinator.
It's not technically below, it's just in the same line as the director.
And then backfill it?
The line all fills up to the Director of Engineering.
So you'd be eliminating the administrative coordinator position, and in exchange, you'd be adding an administrative assistant position.
You'd end up with 2 engineering program coordinators and an administrative assistant, I believe eliminating the administrative coordinator. Then you have 2 folks doing bid processing. Any capital project that needs bid runs through 1 person in this city. So if Parks and Recreation, I think there's an $8 million ask over the next 3 years in order to do Parks and Recreation capital projects. So anything that needs bid would run through this same engineering program coordinator in the engineering department, plus the street program, plus the sidewalk program, and any other utility work that's necessary inside of the engineering department. Right, so now you create 2, and now you no longer have 1 single point of failure. You have 2 people who can back each other up and perform the same function, and then you backfill the administrative assistant to do some of the other duties like paying invoices, sending letters to residents that their sidewalk is going to be completed, communicating with them on the phone, and doing any traditional administrative duties that currently are falling to that administrative coordinator. This is the same exact way that Parks and Recreation is set up, and when you look at the Service and Engineering Department, it's very, very similar. And I'm sorry, I said Service and Engineering. When you look at the Service Department, it's very similar to the way in which their superintendents function on down the line. Because while we're looking to add positions, and we're talking about one very, very specific thing, there is a cascade effect that impacts other people. We're not just adding an administrative assistant in order to assist with answering the phone and sending out letters. There's also a plan in order to address other needs and other gaps that we have, such as a single point of failure for a bid process. Right now, if that person was to go out on sick leave, extended sick leave, we're going to be shuffling around in order to bid a project.
Is an administrative assistant or an administrative coordinator a higher pay grade?
The administrative coordinator is a higher pay grade. I believe an administrative assistant is a C9, and the coordinator is a 12.
Okay.
And the engineering program coordinator, I believe, is a 14.
Any comments from council on that particular position? This is, again, this is the administrative assistant, the ask to add in Department of Engineering.
I'm sorry, just to Miranda's other point about it being potentially cost neutral when we increase those right-of-way administration fees and those types of things, that's going to pay for a portion of this particular position as well. Those fees have not been looked at since the mid-2000s and are way out of line with our neighboring communities.
Anything from council on that? I guess what I would ask is, there are, I believe there's another ask in here for an administrative coordinator in the Department of Finance. Any ability to share duties?
No. There's, I have. Here is the long list of projects and tasks for the administrative coordinator that are currently being spread out between myself, Director Burry, HR Manager Nolan, IT Manager Carter, Director Schultz, Senior Director Weibensinger, the rest of the HR team, half the finance team.
Okay.
We've implemented numerous technologies in the past 5 years since I've been here, and those systems require a lot of management and maintenance, particularly our finance system, our HRIS system, which is a human resources information system, UKG, which is our time and attendance system, and we're getting ready to launch a learning management system as well.
All right, council, so again, I'm still sitting on administrative assistant in engineering. A yay or a nay on that item?
I'm fine, and I said this before, it's coming out of the enterprise funds. The heartburn was always the general fund. I don't really care.
Just to clarify, this is not an enterprise fund, it's the issue 12 special fund.
Well, okay. Right.
Special revenue. I personally don't have a concern with interns. I think it's fairly cheap labor, gets people a skill set, and hopefully they come and work for us down the road. Anybody feel differently about the intern?
Interns are good.
All right. So you guys have made note of that?
Keep the administrative assistant?
That's what I'm hearing.
And all interns?
That's what I'm hearing so far.
Great. Thank you.
All right, just moving up the list. Parks and Recreation, this one is under the general fund. Recreation Coordinator 2.
The Recreation Coordinator 2 is being requested to be funded. The Parks Master Plan identified the farmers market as a top priority and community special events as a third highest priority for the community. In addition, this person will help with expanded volunteer coordination, and then listed on here, currently we have one recreation supervisor that's responsible for all events in the city and all in the volunteer program, as well as paddle boats in the summer. So for 2024, there's approximately over 65 events planned. New 2024 events that will be added to the Parks and Recreation team are a weekly farmers market from June to August. That's 12 farmers markets. The Touch-a-Truck, which has historically been done by the Public Service, will be expanded and moved under the Recreation Supervisor to coordinate that event. Gahanna 175. And then Stephanie and her team were able to add. So the farmers market is anticipated to take roughly 270 hours for planning, coordination, and actually being on site. And then the 4th of July, just in general, that's about 265 hours.
Council, Parks and Rec Coordinator 2, out of the GF. Any comments?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowers?
Yeah, I think just broadly, this is just a consideration, and perhaps you've already had these conversations internally. I think about the position that we're in as a community and the organizations that exist, and thinking about how we can leverage those relationships and those organizations that exist that would ultimately have a lower impact to our long-term budget, our long-term obligations to staff, et cetera. For example, supporting a nonprofit organization to deliver the types of things that we're talking about, or, and I guess I'm just thinking broadly about how we leverage those opportunities with community partners versus bringing it in-house.
Do you have a question, or would you like a comment on that? Director Farrell can make a comment.
has something to say.
Ultimately, the positions that we're requesting will be the liaison for just what your statement was. There are policies, there's safety, there's coordination with public safety entities, with ultimately how we manage special events. In some cases, we're bringing thousands and thousands of people into one location. We have to make sure that city staff understand what the impact is to not only the event itself, but also the surrounding parties. So the coordination, whether it be hosted by the city or in partnership with another entity, does require staff time. Similar to what Director Vollmer had stated, we are seeing a ramp up with events. We've, of course, through pandemic, we've also seen an expectation of more. As stated within the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, it was the top priority with Farmers Market, but then also third highest from a priority investment ranking. So what that ranking does is just request from the community as far as what the needs are and what they want to see and expanded, and that's the results that we receive. So we're reacting to those results. Also worth noting is that we've seen turnover within our supervisor in that position specifically. It is it's a highly demanded job when it comes to staff hours. It takes a significant amount of coordination on the front end, but then we're also requiring you to be there on site. So the number of hours is daunting, and we need to provide support in order to have qualified staff remain in that position.
Would this position enable continued camp programming throughout the year, or expanded camp programming throughout the year? I know it doesn't fund counselors and that kind of thing for camps, but.
That is funded through a different section within the department. This ultimately, this position is responsible for hosted special events that the city manages, as well as partnerships with, whether it be a 5K or a large-scale CVB event like the Blues and Jazz Festival. So this position, again, events are May through December in essence. That planning is all year long. So there's not necessarily an off-season when it comes to anything that we do in reality. This position is also responsible for partnership and sponsorship dollars. We've seen at excess of nearly $70,000 of additional funding coming in to help support the offset of costs associated with special events. So those relationships and those requirements of the expectation of those partners is at the duty of this position, hence why the support is necessary.
And just to clarify, the youth and family programming, there is a recreation supervisor and a recreation coordinator too that do those programs.
Will this position eliminate any overtime burden on other employees?
There absolutely is the opportunity to do that. Right now, we have seasonal positions that help with on-site coordination, but also keeping in mind that that doesn't relieve the supervisor from being on staff. The opportunity here is to have a full-time qualified individual to help relieve some of the responsibilities from the supervisor to be on site for these events.
The supervisor is an exempt salaried position. The recreation coordinator, too, is an hourly position.
So does this position have the potential for significant overtime then, on top of the budgeted salary?
Employees are not able to work in overtime unless it's approved. We would manage that effectively.
Any additional comments from council on this particular item?
I have some questions.
Mr. Renner?
So, I'm a little bit surprised to see 4th of July on this position. I mean, we've been supporting the 4th of July for years. So where was that?
It's not, this position would be part of the coordination with the 4th of July. The 4th of July is something that not just one person coordinates. It is a full city effort. It's noted here to just quantify the amount of hours that it takes to put on an event. Ultimately, for one day, it was just a reflection of the amount of time that it requires.
So you're saying that you wanted another position in order to support all the efforts that the 4th of July has on the city?
No, I included, since the farmer's market was new, I wanted to include the anticipated hours it's going to take someone to coordinate at that event. The 4th of July I just added so there's awareness of that's how many hours it takes, whether that's divided between the current supervisor in this position. Currently, the current supervisor is spending 265 hours alone to plan that event.
The goal is ultimately to show that the event may be from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m., but the amount of hours that it takes before and after is significant. It's not to say that that's going away if this position is not funded. That is not what the intended purpose of that slide is.
I mean, the farmer's market apparently, I guess, is a done deal because we had an entity that actually was doing that, and now we're absorbing it to take it on. I feel that that's actually sad that we couldn't have supported an entity to keep that going by there. And why do we have to take it on? I also have a little bit of a problem that Parks is starting to take on more than events that are more than just really basically parks. And I'm struggling.
To clarify, we did provide support to the farmers market. It was weekly support. The farmers market does take a significant amount of effort, and to require a volunteer to do that is asking a lot. So it really came down to a strategic conversation with the individual involved. It was very clear that we did not want to step on any toes, but we were ultimately there to help. The reason why it was an opportunity for us was based off of the data that we gained from the Parks Master Plan. So it was identified that it was important to the community. We had a volunteer entity that was challenged with committing the amount of time that they did commit to it. So it provided an opportunity for us to take it where they left it and manage it, again, based off of the information that was provided. Anything within parks, if it doesn't fit in our mission statement, we don't do it. That is something that is very, it's a requirement of anything that we move forward on. Obviously, that's understood that if there's an agency or a partner who wants to provide a special event within the community, it is our role to help manage and provide logistics to that agency.
So if some other entity wanted to, come in a nonprofit that's organically grown inside the city of Gahanna, wanted to actually put on an event, this position would actually support that?
The special event application runs through the Parks and Recreation Department. So yes, that this position would have an opportunity to review that application and of course, presented up the reins depending on what type of event was applied for.
How is that different than what's happening now?
It's another level of support. We're requiring one person to do that. Now we have an opportunity to provide support to that individual.
It's a lot of work. When you have, right now, we have one person who's coordinating all of the city programmed events. Everything from the egg hunt to the Goblin Fest to the 4th of July, which is multiple days. Then you have the support to large-scale events. Then you have the support to, Councilman, to your question. The Arts Council wants to do a symphony in Headley Park. That requires PD because we have to have traffic and we have to know what's going on there. That has to take coordination with the parks. That's porta potties and porta johns, the public service, the electrical needs of all of that. That all has to be coordinated through the Parks and Recreation Department. It's just a lot for one person to handle, and then to also require that one person to be on site from beginning, from setup through the event, through tear down for every event that happens is just, it's asking a lot. It's why we've had high turnover in that position.
Mrs. Padova.
So I'm kind of torn on this too, because you guys do an excellent job with the events that you do. I had forgotten about the egg hunt until she just said that, and yeah, that was awesome. So I love all of the events that you do. I also love the farmers market. Went there quite a bit, but what concerns me the most is that the Parks Master Plan seems to be the driver for this with the farmers market, and it was residents wanting a farmers market when there was already a farmers market existing. And so I don't know if there's really an answer for this, but how do we then take, for lack of other words, take over or assume the farmers market, and then residents still not just continue saying, oh, I wish we had a farmers market when there actually is one every week.
And to clarify, the farmers market is not the driving force for this position. It's just to note that the farmers market is an initiative that the Parks and Recreation Department is taking on in -- we need this position in 2023. To be honest, we have again the number of hours and the expectations that not only our own hosted events have, but also the outside parties that have a level of expectation of communication. We have a requirement of customer service, so lead times and creating something from nothing. We're asking one individual to do a lot of work. So the farmers market is a note that we're expanding what we have today. The notes we have, so we went from, I think there's a total, over 65 events in 2024. That is not including, so the calculations that we received, there's 10 events that are not hosted by the city. So that's 55 city events. At the end of 23, there were roughly 40 events that were non-city events. So by the end of 24, we're going to see 90 events in essence, and I cannot ask one person to do that. I can't.
That makes sense. I think that, I mean, it's one of the big reasons that people love living here is all of the feel-good things that you guys provide. So I think I would be in support of this position.
Do you have anything to add, Ms. Bowers?
Yeah, thank you.
Floor is yours.
Thank you. Director, I am very appreciative of everything that you and your staff do. I worry that maybe we are becoming a bit too event-driven. For example, the Goblin Fest, and I appreciate what Councilwoman Padova mentioned about residents really enjoying our programming. However, the Goblin Festival, started in, during the pandemic. And a lot of things were shut down, and you created an event that allowed people to still participate in a holiday in a safe way. I do think, though, that with the emergence, as you identified, with organizations picking back up their, private events again, and us being able to support those, I wonder if that maybe gives us an opportunity to naturally start phasing out some of the added programming, or added events. The programming is incredibly important. It provides a really important service. I specifically mentioned camps and youth programming, senior programming. Those are the types of things that I think are critically important for Parks and Rec to provide. I don't know that events rank as high. And I think what Councilwoman Padova was trying to drive at a little bit with the farmers market is that we had one for 5 years, and I'm immensely grateful to the volunteers who coordinated that. But in order for it to be something competitive with Worthington or New Albany, it's perhaps more than I worry that our department, or that we're ready to advance forward on, or that we're starting now versus where they started 10, 15, 20 years ago. So I offer my thoughts to say that I'm not asking you to continue. I would not, if I'm not, we cannot fund everything that is being requested, and if it does fall to us to take responsibility for events being dialed back, that's certainly something I'm willing. I'd rather see high quality programming than continued pressure for events.
And again, we drive decisions based off of Parks Master Plan, and that is obviously a driver. That's why we do it, so that we can gain the input that we need in order to make decisions and where our responsibilities lie. And special events was noted as something that the community, they like what we have. They want to see more. With that being said, there is a life cycle, whether it's a program or a special event, based off of how an event runs, the feedback that we receive, we adjust. So there are times that we will make adjustments in order to produce a better quality event. I also don't want to, and sometimes we use the word event and we think of those large scale events. This person's also responsible for those smaller scale. So whether it's a paddle, they're hugely popular, where we'll take a paddling trip and take a group of individuals there. That's considered an event. That's a one-time occurrence that we're able to take. One thing that has been identified is that adult programming is something that the community wants to see more of. Those types of events, again, smaller scale, we're talking 30 people, that's an event where it's a one-time occurrence that we're able to take a group of individuals. Those 65 events that was stated include those as well. So it's not always the Blues and Jazz Festival. It also provides those special one-off programs that we're able to provide. So worth noting, and we need the feedback in order to obviously improve what we do.
So a comment or an observation and then a question from me. As I'm listening to the discussion surrounding the farmers market, I'm reminded of, believe it or not, the city's swimming pool situation. How the city kind of just fell into the pool business because there was a private organization that ran it. They fell into financial disarray, and I don't think there's a single person, well, maybe a handful in the room that are familiar with. I wasn't around when it occurred, but nonetheless, city swoops in, and now it's magically in the pool business, and it has this, obviously, this cost associated with it. I just couldn't help but see the parallels there with the discussion surrounding the farmer's market. Director, you had talked about this position would allow for more, you said the smaller events. My understanding is a lot of those there's a fee associated with those?
I'm sorry, say that again?
There's a fee
There's a
associated
fee,
with some of
yes.
those, right?
So back to our pricing policy, depending on what level is associated, if it's a paddling event, like I stated, there is a fee associated with it because it is driven more to an individual.
Right.
In response to the Goblin Fest, that is a benefit to the community as a whole, so we don't provide a fee to that. So it really is how it's gauged on that pyramid.
Any just high level, how much of this position could potentially be offset through fee revenue as opposed to being strictly tax dollar driven?
I hesitate to give you a percentage without crunching numbers. I can present that to you, but I don't want to just off the hip provide you with a number because it would be a guesstimate at best.
I get it. I guess the last question that I have, if this position doesn't get funded, what doesn't occur?
I honestly am concerned about the ability for our supervisor to do their jobs effectively, and in order to feel supported. That's my number one priority, and then ultimately I think we'll see a level. I'll never say the level of excellence that we have will never change, but we have to turn away at some point. There needs to be a clear-cut divide of what we're able to do and what we do well, and what we need to turn away.
Understood. So what's the will of council on the, sorry, I lost my place here. It's the Recreation Coordinator 2 under Parks and Rec. And we have at least one council member that's spoken up in favor. Mr. Weaver.
Mr. Chair. I think I'm inclined to agree with Ms. Padova on this. I would like to see from this that increased coordination with outside entities. I've heard that it can be a bit of a headache trying to navigate the process, and frankly, it might be a staffing issue. So if this can help alleviate some of that stress for folks, I'm inclined to support it.
Thank you.
Are there two more? Heads nodding. Well, I don't think we're going to get to a majority on that one. This may be one that comes back for supplemental at some point in 2024. Does that seem like a path forward with the majority of council? Okay. We have some heads nodding there. Okay. Director Vollmer, have you made note of that in your list there?
Got it.
Recreation Coordinator 2.
Cut. Yes,
Yep.
I got it.
For the time being. We'll use the word deferred. That brings me to Project Administrator 1 in Parks and Recreation.
I discussed this previously, but there are the numbers of the $8 million in capital funds. There's $1.3 million remaining from 2022, $3 million from 2023, and minus the reduction we did earlier, $3.6 million for 2024 planned, as well as the out capital funds that are in the CIP. So there are essentially, maybe Director Schultz is better to explain project management than I am, but there's a need to ensure that contractors are performing the work as outlined in the contract with the city. So we have a manager who manages $8 million in capital funds, and once that contract is signed and the contractor is out installing playground, trail, whatever it is that is in the capital fund, there is a need to have someone on site during that construction to ensure that construction is being performed as outlined in the contract with the city. Without having a designated person there, they're contractors, they're gonna cut corners if they do, don't, whatever, if we don't have somebody out there to ensure that that contract is being adhered to.
Council?
I just
Mrs.
have
McGregor.
a question. So the $1.3 million in 2022 didn't get done? And 3 million in 2023? I don't understand those numbers.
It's in progress. The 2022 monies would be in progress, but not actually in an implementation phase. So maybe they're still in design, or they're stuck in one way, shape, or form, or they're stalled for some reason. So it's 2022 money. We have an active project, and it's in an active status, but it's not in construction, and it hasn't been completed in 2022. And in part, that's because of the demands that's on the one person, the project manager, who has to manage all of these things, and then also make sure that projects are appropriately staged, so that as one season ends, the next set of projects picks up, and they're just moving, right? If you had, generally speaking, in this type of vein, you have a program manager who manages a whole program. I would see that as, let's say that's the Parks Master Plan as that guiding document. Then you have a project manager, and they manage the individual projects that are within each one of these years and buckets. And they need to make sure that there's that constant cycle and that constant feed. And then the project administrator is ultimately responsible for the guy swinging the hammer, if you would, that's implementing the project and is actually out there pouring the concrete and making sure that things happen. This is the same type of setup and the same type of arrangement that we have over in the engineering department, where we have, I believe Mr. Kennedy's title is project administrator too, because he oversees 2 project inspectors. So right when the street program is going on, we have 2 project inspectors that go out there and function as this person would be functioning, but in the parks world. In the parks world, we have a project manager and a project administrator that ultimately is responsible for the implementation of the project. Needs to ensure, I'm just going to read it directly from the slide because I think it's perfect, needs to ensure that contractors are performing work as outlined in the contract with the city. That happens most of the time, but in some instances, if you don't keep your thumb on some of these folks, I won't tell Mr. Renner this, they're not going to perform work. They're going to cut a corner, and they're going to save, ultimately, they're going to save $1. One of the most simplest examples that I can give you in this particular regard is that there was a resident complaint about a bollard in the middle of a trail at Trapp Park. The project administrator would have taken care of that, except it was me and the project manager that were out there taking care of that and remedying that issue with that particular resident. And there are a lot of these types of issues that do pop up from time to time, and we have a number of them that we talked about during the CIP. The flooding issue under the trail at Morse Road and 62, that roundabout, right? That falls on the project manager, one person to investigate, ultimately remedy and schedule that work, whereas this person would support the project manager and all that work that needs done. In Parks and Rec, we manage over 800 acres of parkland, whether that's prairie or preserve or formal park with formal buildings and formal rental shelters. People break stuff. Right, Sunpoint Park, they like throwing rocks down the toilet. Nobody can understand why, but all that stuff needs fixed when those types of things happen, and there's support staff that manages that, but there's also a time where, you know, this particular set of folks need to be involved and the project needs stood up. I'll also note, just as we're talking about grants, right? We got a $25,000 grant for the human sundial. The parks, the project manager would be the person who's administering that grant, making sure all the compliance work is done in this particular instance. Whereas again, we can offload that to somebody else and make sure that they're staying focused on the projects.
Anything more there, Nancy? So again, just a trip down memory lane. I remember when we were trying to secure dedicated capital funding, one of the visuals that I think that resonated a lot with residents as personally as I was going door to door was this idea of, you know, our playgrounds were on, Director Farrell, maybe you can correct me, I think they're supposed to be replaced every 12 or 20 years, and we were on something ridiculous, like a 50-year replacement cycle based on the, you know, the allocable funding to them. So I want to say that I'm sympathetic to the backlog that exists, and obviously like seeing, you know, new shiny things, you know, get, you know, I like seeing us get caught up, just put it that way. But I guess my question that I feel that, you know, in this process of due diligence that I have to ask is there any of this, I'm going to rephrase this, is this position being driven by the pace? Meaning we've got 5 years worth of catch-up, again, that sort of pig in the python analogy, or do you see this being necessary for 20 years?
I think this is a 20-year position. I do not see this being pace. If the Parks Department needs to cycle through these things, because everything has a life cycle like we've talked about, one of the biggest differences between engineering and their infrastructure type projects is those come with an inspection component and a third-party inspector. Most of our parks projects don't come with that same tie. So that's why I would see this more as a 20-year position as opposed to just, you know, let us catch up and then we can take a breath.
Thank you. Anything from council on Project Administrator 1, Parks and Rec? Yay, nay?
Okay. I'll just say that I know that because of the deferred maintenance that we've had, in order to catch up, there's a lot of projects being done, but we need to, in my mind, we need to have somebody that can inspect them and make sure they're done properly. And it doesn't do any good to spend the money and then have it not be spent well.
Is that consensus? This one's in? Yeah. Heads are nodding? Okay. Director Volmore, do you have that? That one's in?
Got it.
All right. Just moving up the list. IT support specialist, the administration is saying that can be deferred. Does that require debate, or is our ask just to defer? Defer, okay.
Which one was that? I'm sorry.
That's the IT support specialist. That brings me to Finance Administrative Coordinator, Director Volmer. I think you had a laundry list for that position.
Yeah, I do. So one of the good examples of a position that we funded last year that's made drastic improvements for this city is last year you all funded a risk and safety administrator. Melissa Jackson holds that role and is doing an excellent job in that role. One of the things she's been able to do is to really enhance our risk and liability insurance program, and that's everything from property damage and claim management to processing, communication with the insurance company and the responsible party. In addition to that duty, she also is responsible for the safety program. If you might remember, she's embarking on the city's first ever safety program this year and is doing a tremendous job. And Senior Director Weibensinger can speak more to that as he's her direct supervisor. But they are getting much needed training out to our field staff. This position will assist her in administering that risk and liability insurance program by managing claims. We do manage some claims below a certain threshold here at the city instead of turning those into our insurance company. Much like if you run your car into a guardrail, sometimes you might turn it into your insurance. You might choose not to because you don't want your deductible to go up. So there is a certain threshold at which we manage the claims in-house here at the city. That takes a significant portion of time, depending on who's hitting city property. You all know that the traffic cabinets get hit often. So in addition with that, this position will assist with projects that we've already discussed here, the strategic plan, the sustainability, the training program, and that's more from an administrative standpoint. Scheduling meetings with a large group of people, I'm sure you know in your roles, is a nightmare sometimes. In addition, I already spoke about the system management upgrades. Director Burry and myself have implemented a lot of technology over the past few years. Some of them are listed there. We are currently working with the council office to migrate our public records into a new management system. That includes all the HR personnel files. Those require not only getting them into the new system, then maintaining those files. Our IT inventory management needs some help. This person would help with that as well. Accounts payable, receivable for HR, IT, finance, DAS, which includes the risk and liability insurance program and the safety program, as well as capital projects. Those are being paid from a variety of folks right now. Budget monitoring, including the city's professional development and training programs. That's taking staff anywhere from 5 to 20 hours a week, depending on the requests that are coming in to administer those programs and budget monitoring. Intake for the departments, there's multiple reporting that we put out, a records officer, as well as contract monitoring. We have a variety of contracts under ITHR, Finance, Mayor's Court, and citywide initiatives. Those contracts need monitoring, as well as managing the citywide office supply accounts as well.
Thank you. Thoughts from council? Director Ballmer, again, if this position doesn't get funded, just to do our due diligence up here, what doesn't happen?
Those system management and updates will fall behind as they already are. I have a stack of training requests, probably about this big, sitting on my desk of staff who've attended training that we have hosted. All of that information needs to get into our human resources information system to track attendance at those, and then have a printout of training for employees from a risk and liability standpoint to show that we are training our staff appropriately. The risk and liability insurance program will take away Ms. Jackson's time in administering that safety program that the city desperately needs to get a handle on. A lot of these other tasks that are on here are divided amongst a lot of the people sitting behind me. By taking this administrative task off, people like Joanne and I were able to do more of the things that we're paid appropriately to do.
Understood. All right, council, is this one in? Is this one out?
I'm inclined to say yay.
Okay. A couple heads nodding. Is that sufficient for a consensus? Yeah. All right, it's in. All right, moving on. Next one. Again, this was on the administration's able to defer list, mayor's office, marketing and communication specialist. Should we just take the layup and ask for the deferral? Defer. Okay. And then the last one is the intern. Again, I don't have any issues with interns in general. Okay, so just to recap, here's what I know. And I'm just thinking out loud. If anyone knows differently, please correct me. But to summarize what we've discussed, leaf collection out, CIC reduced to an absolute dollar amount of $300K. Action Sports Park appropriation this year reduced to an absolute dollar amount of $300K. IT admin position out. Park Coordinator 2 position out. And then the Marketing and Communications Specialist position out. Is that what everybody else knows? Okay. So the budget ordinance will need to be amended on Monday?
Yes, and we'll also have some other items from the staff that have been identified since the budget was delivered. That'll be as part of those, but I'll have it, same as I do in previous years, I'll have the original request and then all the changes that are incorporated in there to get to the final number. But just so you are all aware, there will be some other changes that are coming from items that have come up since we gave the budget to council.
Okay. Anything further for finance? This is going on regular agenda for next Monday. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good night.
Oh, wait, one.
Oh. Well, finance is concluded.
Yeah, finance is concluded.
Back over to you, Mr. Renner.
Do you have a motion to adjourn our special meeting? Done. Thank you.